It's good to have you all here. And if you're listening by the internet, we want to welcome you as well. It's a beautiful day in Glenwood Springs, and we're excited to be here. So we'll get started I'll call the meeting to order, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag's over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, well, we'll begin. Does anybody have any questions about the agenda? Any additions, corrections? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. It's been moved by Director Wells, seconded by Director Goebel, that we approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. That was a pretty wimpy gavel there. I'll do better next time. All right. You all had a chance to review the minutes of the May 23rd and 24th meeting. Do you have any corrections or additions to the minutes? I believe I have one to my left. Director Dutton.
Under item 23, it looks like we have an action from John McLeod that's left over from the March minutes. So if we can strike those from the May minutes. Oh, I found one more.
Oh, no. Another one?
Yes, one moment. In item 29, the staff recommendation talks about the reservoir cam riprap. I think it's dam riprap project.
Maybe.
Maybe.
All right. We have two corrections to the minutes. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes with those corrections. It's been moved by Director Wells, seconded by Director Anderson, that we approve the May 23rd and 24th, 2018 minutes with two corrections pointed out by Director Dutton. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right. Agenda item 3, approve or remove the consent agenda items. Is there any discussion here? Director Curran. Or Director Triggs.
Yes, consent agenda item 1A. I have a conflict with my firm represents the applicant East Larimer County Water District. So I will need to recuse myself from the voting on that item.
All right. So what we'll do there is we'll just remove that from the consent agenda item 1A. We'll move it down to right after this, and we'll act on it separately. So any other questions or discussion? I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda item with the removal of agenda item 1A. It's been moved by Director Goebel, seconded by Director Wells, that we approve the consent agenda item with the removal of agenda item 1A. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, we'll act on agenda item 1A of the consent agenda. So I would entertain a motion on that. Okay, wake up, people. Oh, there we go. It's been moved by Director Goebel, seconded by Director Anderson, that we approve consent Consent agenda item 1A. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. It will be noted that Director Trick did not vote on consent agenda item 1A. Agenda item 4, our future board meetings. We have September 18th through the 20th in Steamboat. So that's a 3-day meeting. That is our budget meeting as well. Is that correct? Director?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And then we also have one in the South Platte Basin, which hasn't been set for a location yet. So those are the 2 upcoming meetings, and the South Platte Basin is November 14th and 15th. All right. Well, let's begin on director's reports. DNR director, we have Amy Moyer standing in for Bob Randall. So go ahead, Amy.
Sure. Good morning. Amy Moyer, Assistant Director for Water with DNR, and I will be giving the DNR Director's Report on behalf of Director Randall, who sends his regrets and is unable to be here today. He is currently with the governor, who will be announcing an executive order later this morning regarding actions to safeguard orphan oil and gas wells throughout the state. I do also have a few updates to provide, primarily related to outdoor recreation. The Summer Outdoor Retailer Show will be held next week, July 23rd through 26th in Denver. It's the largest trade show for the outdoor industry in North America. And you may remember that Denver recently won the bid for this show beginning in January when it moved to Colorado from Utah. The winter show had over 29,000 attendees and 7,500 retailers there. Water is a big theme for this summer's conference, and many panels and discussions held during the show will be weaving in the importance of water to the outdoor recreation opportunities in the outdoor industry here in Colorado and everywhere across the country. Also, along the outdoor industry front, I want to provide an update on some listening sessions that have been held and are scheduled throughout the summer through the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission and CPW staff. As many of you guys are aware, we're seeing a rising demand for outdoor recreation among new users and uses, activities across the board, mountain biking, stand-up paddleboarding, wildlife watching, whitewater sports. And as a result, Colorado Parks and Wildlife has initiated a series of forums to explore how to expand its customer base, engage new users, and better serve the public and meet its goals. The first forum was held last week in Crested Butte and offered a listening opportunity for CPW to learn and better understand the values of Coloradans who love and value any type of outdoor recreation across the state. A second forum will also be held in September here in Glenwood Springs, which will begin initial discussions surrounding the next Colorado State Park. So this was a requirement in the Future Generations Act, which was a bill passed by the General Assembly this past legislative session that looked at the financial sustainability of CPW, and as part of that, directed CPW to begin to identify and begin to plan the development of a new Colorado State Park. So this forum will kick off conversations surrounding that issue. So some exciting news ahead related to many outdoor opportunities across the state here in Colorado. And finally, regarding fires, as you know, it's been a tough fire season with over 20 fires in the state since June. And I believe 13 are still being actively managed at various sizes and various levels of containment. So we continue to work very closely with our sister agencies within Colorado state government, but also local governments and our federal agencies on response and recovery. And I believe you'll be hearing more about CWCB specific efforts surrounding response to fires, flood risk, and drought throughout this meeting here over the next 2 days. And so with that, Director Yan, that concludes my report, unless there are any questions.
Are there any questions for Amy this morning? None? I just want to know on the outdoor recreation that's going on in Denver. The South Platte Basin Roundtable and the Metro Roundtable are going to have a booth there. Our education coordinator is going to have a booth at that to inform people, educate people about water in the South Platte Basin anyways. All right, we'll move on. So the IBCC Director Stoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board. We have a tentative date for our next IBCC meeting with all the people. I don't know how many doodle polls that Viola has done. It's a waste of time poll sometimes, I guess. But anyway, I think we've centered on October 18th at this point. And we're probably going to have it out of the metro area. So she's looking at some possibilities on the western slope. So we'll see where that ends up. Being since out in October, we have plenty of time to notify everybody when we decide. But main activities since the last Conservation Board meeting has been the funding committee working. And as I've reported before, there's kind of three different groups on having the discussion around the funding implementation of the water plan. Of course, the IBCC group had a face-to-face here several weeks ago and is circulating a draft right now of a summary of that. And some of you, I think, have seen that as get the rest of the comments in, why then it'll be shared with the full IBCC as well as then I think some of the roundtables to kind of get a response there, but it's been very favorable. The Walton Gates group continues to work, and several of us here are involved with that. And so we're discussing the possibility of having at the IBCC meeting, having some representation from that group come and have a conversation with the IBCC. At the same time, the Colorado Ag Water Network folks, the Colorado Cattlemen's, is kicking off a series of meetings this summer, early fall, along the same thing, looking more directly maybe at the ag component of the funding potential. So a lot of activity in that area, and so we'll try to keep you up to date on that. The only other thing I have is that the staff has been working with the Water Congress, mainly Doug Kemper, on a kind of a one-pager information sheet on implementation of the water plan, and that's coming together quite well. I think Doug had passed that by most of his board recently with a few tweaks, and so that'll be shared with the public here in the near future. I just really appreciate the staff as they keep the ball rolling. Brent Newman serving on an interim committee with the smaller working group with the Walton Gates folks, and Greg Johnson and Russ Sands and Megan Holcomb have been working with the Water Congress in addition to what they normally do too. So very appreciative of that. Any questions for me?
Any questions for Director Stoll? All right, thank you very much. Ag Commissioner Brown, Director Brown.
Well, thank you, everyone, and it's good to be here this morning. I guess I'll start with, I've got a handful of things I want to talk about, and I promise not to use. I'll cram my 7 minutes into 30, right, Jim, if that works. But I want to talk a moment about the drought, and of course, everybody knows that exists. But one thing I think we often don't realize as we think primarily of irrigated and the lack of water there, I think often is where we go. Only 8% of Colorado's farmland is truly irrigated. And so consequently, the lack of rainfall typically is extremely burdensome on those other producers who rely on it. And typically these operations will involve both dry land, whether it be native pasture or irrigated. So in Colorado, we've got a disaster designation of some fashion in darn near every county, whether it be hail, the large blizzard last spring, or the bottom half and the northwest component of the state is Farm Service Agency disaster declared. And that's a unique thing that is a bit frightening because we haven't experienced that in many, many, many years. We're seeing livestock auctions at La Junta. 3,000 heads sold a week or two ago. They haven't had a July livestock auction in years. So that tells you that we're pulling cattle off, selling calves before they should be sold, and probably the mama cows are leaving as well. We've got people up in the high country hauling water to their sheep. I was over at the Wool Growers Convention last week. Seems like 100 years ago, on the road again. Old Willie and I have a lot in common. Well, some things we have in common, other things we don't have in common. Better be careful here. We do live in the Green State. But point being, on the road again, and good old wool growers, they're hauling water up into the high country already. They can't remember how long ago it was to water the sheep, and probably to water the grass too. But anyway, and then we're going to have a hay shortage problem. So it's very real to our producers out there in a time when things are critical already, and I'll get to that a little later. The federal lands component, we're hearing more talk about multiple uses, and we're seeing more pressure on an ag component from the recreation folks. The definition of, I don't know if any of you have watched Yellowstone yet, but anyway, the comment they made was, as a transient, somebody who comes in and wants to bring the way they did it where they came from to where you're at. And I think a little bit I feel that way here in Colorado, particularly in the agricultural industry. I think we're constantly playing defense because people have other uses in mind, and we've only been doing it for 100 and some years. And so that applies pressure to our industry. Federal lands issues are, of course, always a big one, and multiple uses extremely important to agriculture. We've got I think we've developed a better relationship with BLM and Forest Service. We in the Department of Ag, since we made a Conservation Services Division Director, Federal Land Focus, we're writing MOUs, we're doing Section 8 agreements, we're sitting at the same table and facing the same direction for once. And so I think that's been great. That's been very, very helpful. One pressing issue, and recently BLM, Forest Service, Director Broscheid and myself met with those who believe that the bighorn sheep, and they are getting ill about various, primarily a pneumonia, but the domestic sheep have been, they would simply like the domestic sheep removed from the range. And we don't believe, all four of us, we don't believe that that's appropriate, that we believe effective separation can be accomplished. And in a fashion, we have to be careful. Their solution is remove the sheep and then see if that works. If we remove the sheep people are gone. They're not coming back. And so we have to be awful careful that the solution, in fact, they've identified the problem correctly, and that we've and are using the appropriate solution. And that was made pretty clear by all four agencies. The Republican River component, we're getting closer on all those types of agreements. And so I'd like to thank you on behalf of the producers in that area for the efforts you've made to provide some funding in that area. We're working on the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program in that area as well, as part of a supplement to, that's been an ongoing struggle. And I've spent a lot of time in DC. Finally, USDA's got all its deputy secretaries in place, and particularly one, the head of Farm Service Agency, who happens to be a personal friend of mine, a man named Bill Northey, who was commissioner secretary in Iowa. And so that's been helpful, and we're moving much faster than we were. Senate Bill 167 was an interesting one, dial before you dig. And when that was initially written and I read it, I had to read it 3 times to make sure that it, let's see, how do I say this, said what it didn't say. And that was the fact that if any farmer and rancher wanted to take a shovel and stick it into the soil and you moved that soil, that was called excavation. So it didn't matter if you were dipping into the soil to see if your wheat needed moisture. It didn't matter if you were burying a dead cat. It didn't matter if your pickup was stuck. If you went to the full extent of the statutes, you were in violation, and you should have called 811. So it was interesting, and it was quite a campaign. Agriculture got most of its exemptions back so that at least we can continue to conduct business. You couldn't dig a fence post hole on your ranch without calling 811. The overreach was enormous. I will inform you as homeowners, though, if you're working in your yard. Now write this down, because this is important, because I know that you're not going to believe me, but this is what you need to do. You can excavate to the depth of 12 inches. However, the top 4 inches, you can use mechanical means, including a shovel. Once you get below 4 inches, from 4 to 12 inches, you're going to have to use your hands, or you're going to have to get Shep to do the digging. Once you get below 12, you are now in violation and need to call 811. So I hope you've got darn good fingernails, because you're going to be digging from 4 to 12. That's the current statute. I could only fix what I could fix. But point being, this seems to me to be an overreach in it. But I think we've got our agricultural exemptions in place so that we can continue to conduct business. I'm not one who's promoting the lack of safety, but I think there's a reasonableness someplace in here that needed to be reached. Tariffs have become an enormous issue in agriculture. And of course, you know, everybody complains, and farmers are professionals. They practice every day. But we seem to be a bit of the tip of the spear on the tariff retaliation from a lot of these other countries, such as China, the EU, Mexico, and Canada. And we've seen an abrupt decline in prices, particularly when in early June, the first 25% on the was announced that we were going to implement it, and then the additional 10% on the several hundred billion. All of a sudden now grain values have fallen from 15 to 20% in a matter of about 40 days. And so that's pretty hard on our producers. We're now down below break even again. Well, we were marginal at best. So it's been a tough deal out there, and the farm bill needs to pass. We need some positive news in agriculture. But after that, we're done whining and complaining, and we're going to keep on planting and plowing, aren't we, John? So if does anybody have any questions, I mean, I've got a shovel and a tape measure for you if you need one. They're for sale. I don't need them any longer.
All right. Thank you, Director Brown. Any questions for Director Brown? The only thing I'd say about the call before you dig bill, we didn't get any exemptions in irrigation from that.
No,
so
you did not.
When we clean a ditch or anything like that, even though we've been there for 100 years,
you're in violation.
We're in violation. So
it was quite a struggle, and I think it slipped up on all of us. I mean, in agriculture in particular, and I'm referencing us.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Now we have our CWCB Director Mitchell.
Thank you. I get to talk about some of the really riveting stuff first, being the website revision update. So we definitely have gotten some comments on the complexity of and non-user friendliness of our website, and we really focus on trying to get that done right away. It's scheduled for early 2019. I was hoping to get that done before then. I want to say that the schedule has been pushed back from its original plan due to technical delays on the part of our web hosting provider. I've been explained to what happened. It involves something that is called a Drupal platform. I don't know what that means, but that's the problem. So we're planning a redesign and use this time and use the delay. If ever you can use a delay, we're gonna do it. So we're gonna get some user input and make sure that we get as much input from our users, and we're going to have a survey posted on the website soon so that folks can tell us what's most important. Also, the website that houses the Colorado Decision Support System is currently in the middle of an upgrade. The look and feel of the site will be much more modern and streamlined, but it will still have all the same functionality and remain the same. But that's expected to go live in early August. And Carolyn Kemp from the CWCB is the one that's been asked to be contacted if there's any additional input. So she's been working hard on that, and I want to make sure to thank her for that. In regards to some of what's happening on the Upper Colorado and the River Commission held its summer meeting in Santa Fe, New Mexico on June 20th. John represented Colorado as the Commissioner James Eklund had a previous engagement. And so John represented Colorado, but we were in attendance. So he was heavily supported. I would think he would agree. The commission heard an update on the 2018 System Conservation Pilot Program and a proposal for Colorado River augmentation. The UCRC also adopted a resolution suspending the administration by the Commission of the Upper Basin System Conservation Pilot Program after 2018 to commence investigation of a potential large-scale operational demand management program. There was also an unusual opportunity with that UCRC meeting to meet with the lower basin states. And so we got to meet with not only the Upper Colorado River Commission, but all of the commissioners from both the upper and the lower basin states, along with the Bureau of Reclamation leadership. The discussions were primarily focused on the drought contingency planning efforts. It took some encouragement by the commissioner, not much, but the basin states are reaffirming their commitment to complete the drought contingency plan efforts in both the lower and upper basin states. So we've begun our upper basin process. Karen Kwan is representing us on a small group and working through that process. Also, in regards to Upper Colorado River, not the same kind of thing, but the Endangered Fish Recovery Program, CPW holds fishing tournaments so that they have an annual fishing tournament, and there was one held in June at Elkhead Reservoir. There's one being held this month at Ridgeway, and the fishing tournaments are jointly funded by CPW and CWCB, and CWCB got to host the award ceremony and provide food and staffing for the event. So I have to thank the staff that went, because they spent their weekend. Those fishing tournaments don't happen on a midweek Wednesday. They happen over the weekend, and it involved camping and helping people. And so Eric Sky, Elgin, Jojo, Doug, Sam, our intern, caught his first fish ever, and Andrew were there. So we would consider that a success. The objective of these tournaments is not just to have fun, but to really focus on the capture of non-native fish species, which are not compatible with the recovery programs, and especially as they relate to endangered fish. So this year, 322 northern pike were captured and 540 smallmouth bass. That's a big deal. So we have to thank not only the staff, but I guess the fishermen that were out there too, fisherwomen or men that were out there, and fisher people. So I think a lot of times work looks like fun and fun looks like work. So that was an example of that. The governor's water availability task force is the next thing I wanted to discuss. There'll be a meeting on July 24th from 9 to 11:30 a.m. at the Durango Recreational Center in Durango. It's really appropriate that it's in Durango at this point, because leading into the drought update, their persistent drought continues throughout parts of Colorado. Southwest is hit especially hard, and so appropriate that we're able to have that task force down there at this time. I know that you all recall me mentioning that the governor activated state drought response plan in May for the agricultural sector. The USDA has issued a secretary drought designation for 40 counties within the state, and some contingent designations for an additional 14 counties. So the month of May was on average the second warmest on record, and the warmest since 1934. The daytime highs were above normal, but also the nighttime highs were above normal, which probably contributed to the early snow melt. So we are watching this. With that being said, I wanted to lead in a little bit to the 416 fire north of Durango that started June 1st. It's still burning. It's, I don't think 100% contained at this point. The San Juan National Forest has been closed due to high fire danger resulting from prolonged drought. Some parts of the southwest Colorado received roughly just 2 inches of rain. in June, and this is a really uncommon occurrence for this area. So things are remaining dry, and that's troubling. But then comes another thing, and that's when it starts raining at this point, as we're looking at these conditions and now we're praying for rain, there's some worry that comes with that also. And so when rain or floods hit, as they typically do about this time of year, that late July, we get our monsoon season, there are issues with concerns with the flooding that happens in those burn scar areas. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of CWCB's involvement was that as a response to the fire, the CWCB, along with a couple partners, but in the National Weather or Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management teamed, and we did a pretty quick deployment of a temporary radar system that's located near Durango. The radar system came from the University of Oklahoma, and this is in an effort to provide an advance warning for those flooding potential events. That where the fire is located is what we would consider a black hole in the National Weather Service. The closest radar is in Grand Junction, and it's blocked by the San Juan Mountains, so you can only see the tip of a storm. So it's hard to predict what's happening there. I have to give a huge shout out to Joe Busto, who worked with the University of Oklahoma. The original cost estimate was higher than what they came in at, because we called and begged to get some costs down so we could easily get the money out and get the radar system deployed. I think it took 13 days to get the radar system out. I think that says a lot in terms of when people put their shoulder to it, how much we can get done. And so Joe was huge on that. The cost was an 80-20 split between CWCB and the Department of Homeland Security Emergency Management. The total cost was $95,000. It covers from July 1st through October 1st. At this point in time, no local funds were invested, but they're really looking at the long-term need for a permanent radar system down there. So I'm sure that will come up again. I wanted to talk a little bit about staffing too, just really briefly. Eric Sky, who you see sitting over there, received a promotion within the Interstate and Federal Water Information section. So he's been promoted to the role of Special Projects Coordinator in that same section. So he'll continue to work on high groundwater issues in the South Platte Basin and still oversee the Tamarisk management grants. He's taken on some additional roles and responsibilities also including some work with the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program and Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Program. So I wanted to congratulate him. Thank you, Eric. And he's worked hard to get to that point. That put in a hole and a vacancy. And with that vacancy was posted and filled by Andrew Rickert. And so you might think that he is just the best board coordinator ever, but there's a little bit about Andrew that you don't know about. He holds a master's of public administration focusing on environmental policy, management, and law. So maybe a little overqualified for his current position, but and also his thesis focused on the EIS process for the Bureau of Reclamation. So I think he is well suited for the work that he's gotten into, and he is going to be severely missed. And I'll still yell down the hall for him, but so things will be changing, and we're going to figure out how to get someone in that position that can really capitalize on all the administrative stuff that we have going on in the agency, and how to be as efficient as we possibly can with the staff that we have. And so we're hoping to get someone that will stick around in that position for a little bit and not aspire to be better or move on or do anything like that. I'm just kidding. But so that's the big update. There's some. I'm going to take one more minute because Don didn't take all 30 of his minutes. But there's some stuff happening in water conservation, and I wanted to just touch on that briefly. Kevin Reedy's not here yet, but he is a mover and shaker. And so there's some stuff that's happening with the water and growth dialogue through that water efficiency grant that I think we've talked about before. And the Keystone Center is where the Keystone Center is facilitating a dialogue to quantify water use through different land use patterns, as well as bringing together land use and water managers. So the steering committee has released a final report and really focusing on the dissemination of the results. A larger meeting is scheduled for July 24th in Denver to go over those results and then figure out how do we get this information out to more people. So how do we put this information into practice? So Kevin's been working really hard on that. He's also presenting on the dialogue to the Metro Mayor's Caucus in August 1st. And so we hope that those types of presentations will get the info out. That is all I have for my director's report. I actually have like 3 more paragraphs, but I'm going to let them come out throughout the meeting. So thank you. And that's it. Any questions?
Any questions for Director Mitchell? Director Stowe.
Yes. So we're definitely getting to see everything firsthand, and I know there's some things set up so that we can see all of the impacts of the drought. So thanks for hosting us, Southwest Basin.
All right, thank you. Now we have standing in for State Engineer Kevin Ryan, Mike Sullivan, Assistant State Engineer. Thanks.
Thank you,
Mike.
Director. I have to say that Director Mitchell is a hard act to follow. She brings too much enthusiasm, and to follow with a report that dwells on rules is just not going to be a lot of fun. But I'll try and do what I can. The non-tributary groundwater extraction rules are completed and in place. They were required pursuant to House Bill 17-1076. They apply to withdrawal of water that is artificially recharged into non-tributary aquifers. And they were written basically in concert with the same operation that occurs in the Denver Basin areas. So, and I'm going to go really fast. Our dam safety branch is reviewing their rules. As you know, we have to review rules on a regular basis pursuant to the SMART Act. They are going to streamline their rules, try and reorganize them so they make sense. A lot of rule processes are difficult to follow. They're trying to rebuild those into a more easier to understand format. They're also looking at incorporating the results of the Colorado, New Mexico precipitation studies that were conducted over the last couple of years. That work is being finalized. It will help us to understand the impact on spillways and spillway design. And when that's completed, that will be enfolded into the rules, and we'll be starting the stakeholder process on review of those proposed revisions this fall or in early spring, hopefully. So stay tuned. The Republican River Compact rules, we have those rules. Those are for the administration to make sure that we have water sufficient to meet our compact obligations put into the river. Those rules were basically complete as of March or April of 2017. We put those on hold because the local group, Kappa, wanted to make one more round at trying to get some of the outlying areas enfolded into the district. The district has a water plan that comports with the rules as we've proposed them. We went through a series of public meetings with the local folks to try and get them to amend the district boundary, and that takes legislation. There's been a bit of reluctance to that, and after waiting about a year, a little over almost a year now, we're moving forward with those rules as they stand, and we'll be holding a public meeting mid-August in the basin to once more go over the rules as they stand and to discuss options for folks who don't have a plan in place to replace their depletions. And we'll explain the process, which is through the water court rulemaking process. So we'll be moving forward on that relatively quickly this year. The Rio Grande groundwater rules, and this is the last rule I'm going to talk about, are still with the court. We finished briefing in April. The court, there was 3 weeks of trial, so they were pretty well contested. So we expect the court to take some time in coming to a ruling on those rules. I got to chime in on drought, but just a little bit. I took a look at the river flows the last couple of days. About every river in the state is at least less than half of its average. Many of them are at a quarter of their average flows for this time of year. It's just awful out there. There's no water in the rivers. The rain's going to help, but as Becky pointed out, rain also produces flood on those burn scar areas, and we're seeing a little bit of that even with these rains now. In regards to the radar that was reported on, I'd like to thank the CWCB and Joe Busto for working so hard on that. I was down in the valley for 11 years, never could see a storm. There was just a valley-shaped hole in the radar network. It was amazing. You could look at Durango, you could look at Pueblo, and hope like heck something's coming at you. But most of storms in that area, the really significant ones, came up out of the south. And the Albuquerque radar didn't reach that way either. So it'll be helpful for the administration of the water in those areas, because we count on those raindrops making the system work and trying to get that out to the users. And finally, since we're in Glenwood, I wanted to take a moment to introduce the division engineer. Alan, would you stand up? Alan Martellero is the division engineer for the Main Stem Colorado. He lives in Glenwood here with his spouse, and he has several children that he has raised in this valley. Alan was born and went to school in Salida, so he's a Colorado boy, so to speak. He's got a bachelor's of engineering from CSU, which is a really good school, I've heard. I don't know, but I've heard. It is. Go Rams. Go Rams. Okay. He started as a hydrographer in the Glenwood area in 1981. He moved up to become the assistant division engineer in 1988 and the division engineer in 2000. So he's been the division engineer for 18 years now. He's helped work through some difficult issues. How do we administer the Blue River Decree, which has some unique attributes to it, given its federal tie. He's worked on the Moffett firming, the Windy Gap firming, the Moffett work. Green Mountain operations have all been very difficult questions that we had to see if we could make work somehow, and it's been very helpful in doing that. Alan, I cede the rest of my time to Mr. Martellero.
If you do you still have time?
Yeah.
If
you want to
I guess I would like to take
State your name. State your name for the record and then
seriously.
proceed.
Alan Martellero,
Thank you.
division engineer here in Glenwood Springs. Like to welcome you all to the hinterlands, I guess. You get out of the city, especially. Well, good to see Russell. I guess I'd like to thank the board for the contract or the lease with Ute Water, using their root eye water over the last few years. It's been useful for the recovery program. The recovery program is important to our water users. And I guess I'd also like to put in a plug for renewal of that lease agreement for this year. It's an important year for it. The Fish and Wildlife Service normally sets their dry year target flows for the 15-mile reach. This is the important stretch of the river for the recovery program at 810 CFS. That's the normal low they go. Their average is usually 1240. This year, they're sitting at a target flow of around 500 CFS, and we're not even meeting that. We're not even close. We're running around 300 today. This year, again, it's really important to have that additional water from Ute because we are missing the 4 out of 5 year pool in Root Eye. This is that year that we don't have it because Root Eye didn't fill. So we're missing 5,000 acre feet from that pool. And it's unlikely we're going to have the surplus declaration in Green Mountain Reservoir to also use for the recovery program. So an important lease to us, and just thought I'd put in a plug for it, and thank you for the past. Also would like to say that we hope to update our curves that we use for replacement of West Slope Juniors out of Green Mountain Reservoir this year, and we hope to work with the CWCB staff to do that. So pre-thanks for that also. That's all I had.
All right, thanks, Alan. Any questions for Alan while he's... All right, thank you very much. Oh, we'll continue on with agenda item 5F. And Director Broscheid. Oh, we have Jackie with us today.
Oops. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jackie Corday, head of the Water Resources section for CPW, and sitting in for Bob, who I think is on his way, but he had a very ambitious goal of making it here this morning, even though he flew in from DC last night. So when he told us he was going to do that and try to make it here, I was like, you're going to leave at 5:30 in the morning after flying in from DC? And he's like, so I'm sure he'll be here soon. So I unfortunately have to follow up with more drought news. We sent out an email to our 4 senior aquatic biologists to find out what's going on around the state for fish in particular. And so I'm going to just give you some cliff notes from each of the 4 regions on that. So starting with the Northwest region, throughout the Yampa, Green, White, and Colorado River basins, conditions range from moderate to extreme drought, with areas of extreme drought most prevalent within the middle and lower Colorado River Basin. Stream flow conditions, as we've already heard, are minimal in most of the Northwest watersheds, except where some river flows are being augmented by reservoir releases. So where we can, we've been looking for opportunities to keep water in the streams from reservoir releases. CPW aquatic biologists are monitoring water quality and quantity conditions sometimes on a daily basis, but definitely every week for temperature, dissolved oxygen, and stream flow. In waters within every basin, daily water temperatures have exceeded 70 degrees, which, you know, is a scary thing for fish. A lot of the species don't like that. A mandatory fishing closure was implemented on the Yampa River immediately downstream of Stagecoach in the middle of June and remains in effect. A voluntary fishing closure was implemented on the Yampa River from the Chuck Lewis SWA to the western town limits of Steamboat Springs within the last few weeks, and also remains in effect. Before the 4th of July holiday, CPW partnered with several other organizations within the Roaring Fork Valley to encourage anglers to fish at higher elevation waters where they would be cooler, and to do so before 2 p.m. And so we're also looking at closing, going beyond the fish before 2 p.m. rule right now. CPW held informational meeting with the public in Meeker on July 9th to talk about the possibility of releasing water from Lake Avery to augment stream flows in the White River. As you know, there's been, for the past few years, we've been researching what's happening with the algal blooms in the White River. It's been really high. It's like more like the Green River, unfortunately. So we wanted to hold a public meeting to make sure that public understood why we would release from Avery, because there's some indication that Avery does have a little bit higher nutrients, and so that might worsen the bloom. But overall, when you balance that with having more water in the stream, that was looked as the benefit. And the public was receptive to that and supported that. So that was good. As far as fire in the Northwest region, as of July 16th, there are 2 active fires: the Sugarloaf Fire in Grand County, northwest of Silverthorne, and the Lake Christine Fire, located 1 mile northwest of Basalt. So you might have seen that yesterday. Okay. The Sugarloaf has burned 1,200 acres of U.S. Forest Service land and is 35% contained. CPW had initial concerns related to several core conservation populations of Colorado River cutthroat trout that might be at risk if the fire went a certain direction. Unfortunately, they're not at risk at the moment with where the fire is burning. The Lake Christine Fire has burned almost 7,000 acres of federal and state lands and is 59% contained. Concerns are now more focused on rain and what that might bring as far as runoff. As Becky mentioned, that is always a concern. Okay, moving to the Northeast region, the Weston Fire is almost contained. It burned mainly south of the main tributaries and significant fisheries that lead to Antero Reservoir. Some ash flow may be expected into the reservoir with the monsoon season. Although the Platte Basin fisheries are faring better than the West Slope fisheries, biologists are monitoring flow, temperature, and dissolved oxygen levels very regularly. Our main concerns currently are Bear Creek between Evergreen Lake and Morrison, and the South Platte River between 11 Mile Reservoir and Spinney Mountain Reservoir. Closures are not warranted yet, but that's being monitored all the time. So moving to the Southwest region, drought conditions, of course, across that region range from abnormally dry in the upper Gunnison River watershed to exceptional drought in the Four Corners region. Our major fires, Rio Grande, San Juan, Animas, and Gunnison, our major rivers are flowing well below normal, as we know. Biologists continue to monitor all of those. Some rivers exceeding 70 degrees daily. A voluntary fishing closure from noon to 7 is in place on Tamichi Creek, at Tamichi Creek State Wildlife Area near Gunnison. A voluntary fishing closure on the Animas will go into effect soon. So they're talking about that and figuring out how to put that in place. The 416 fire north of Durango is 50% contained, with some activity in the wilderness area. Monsoon rains have triggered daily flash flood warnings, ash and debris flow into Hermosa Creek and Animas River through Durango. Ash flows have caused sporadic fish mortality, mostly brown and rainbow trout and suckers. The fire has impacted habitat for 2 Colorado River cutthroat trout conservation populations in the Hermosa Creek drainage. But in advance of the fire, Colorado trout were rescued by CPW biologists and transported to the Durango fish hatchery. So that, I think they had practice in that from the 2012 fire. I know that they had to do that in the 2012 fire as well. The Spring Creek fire in the San Juan or in the San Luis Valley is 91% contained, but still active in the northwest boundary near Placer Creek watershed. Thus far, fire has impacted the 2 Rio Grande cutthroat trout conservation populations. On July 18th, biologists will attempt to rescue Rio Grande cutthroat trout from one stream and transport them to the Monta Vista hatchery. In the southeast region for the Arkansas Basin, although the Spring Creek fire west of Walsenburg burned a large area, there are no critical T&E fisheries on the east side of the pass. So that's a good thing. We anticipate with the monsoons, there may be significant habitat impacts to those small streams within and below the fire. There may be several Rio Grande cutthroat streams impacted on the west side of the pass. Biologists are monitoring flows very closely and temperatures and oxygen, but we do not anticipate fishing closures at this time. Bear Creek, just outside of Colorado Springs, that contains the pure greenback cutthroat trout, is one of our primary concerns. Average stream flow this time is 1.75 CFS, and the flows have been as low as 0.3 CFS. If you can imagine a stream with just 0.3 CFS. Water temperatures, but it says water temperatures are at 61, so that's good. The fish seem to be tolerating it so far. Now a little bit about parks. Cherry Creek and Chatfields are so far in good shape, thanks to high storage levels from last year's runoff. And other reservoirs are pretty much in good shape. But the Arkansas, we're really having trouble keeping the adequate flows on the Arkansas for recreation. Generally, we try to maintain between 800 and 700 CFS during the recreation season from July 1st to August 15th. That has been very difficult to do. The Bureau of Reclamation usually releases around 10,000 acre feet to maintain the target flows under the voluntary flow management plan. This year, they've agreed to release an additional 3,100 acre feet. And CPW has around 300 acre feet in Twin Lakes that will also be released. But despite all of these efforts, we've had to reduce the length of the recreation season from August 15th to about the 5th, but we're not even sure if we're going to make it to the 5th. CPW greatly appreciates the cooperation of the Pueblo Board of Waterworks, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District in helping keeping the river flowing. Okay, now on to just a brighter note. From our water section news, we're very excited and pleased to introduce Katie Birch, who we have hired to be the new Jay Skinner, which is a very, as you know, very important position for us in support of the in-stream flow program. And so I'd like Katie to come up and introduce herself and give her the mic for a moment and let her tell you about herself.
Thanks.
All right, welcome, Katie.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. So I'm coming from Wilson Water Group, where I was there about 3 years, became pretty familiar with CDSS and water rights, and was lucky enough to work on a couple of more creative projects aimed at water transactions, focusing on getting water back in the river. So I'm really excited to apply my experience and work to get water back in the rivers here in Colorado. Oh, and I grew up in Steamboat. I've lived in Colorado almost my entire life, except for a stint traveling around the West, working seasonally for the Forest Service and conservation groups. So that's a little about me, and I'm excited to learn more about what you all do and spend some time working for you.
All right, thank you, Katie.
So, of course, that means that Jay is going to be retiring at the end of the year. And I think he's having a lot of fun right now training Katie. They've been out in the field a lot these last few weeks. And in a celebration of that, he cut his ponytail. You see, it's missing. It is missing. So, to rave reviews, yes. Yes. Oh. In other retirement news, we were really sad to have Doug Krieger retire. He was such a great guy to work with. He was our senior aquatics manager for the whole state. So he managed the 4 senior aquatic staff plus the native state coordinator, native fisheries coordinator. And he retired on May 31st. But he's going to come back and train the new person, which we're still in the process of finding a replacement. And then the last thing I had is just wanted you to know that we are working with the Colorado Water Trust. They approached us back in April when we knew what a tough water year this was going to be, and they approached us to see if we could look through our senior water rights and find ones that we could forgo the use and keep the water in the stream, basically a short-term lease for this drought year. And we decided to focus on the Southwest region and came up with, first we had 6, and then we filtered it down to 2 that we thought would work best and pass those along to the Water Trust to analyze. And so that's what the stage that we're in is, meeting with them and talking about keeping that water in the stream. And that's it for our water report.
All right. Thank you, Jackie. Any questions for Jackie or Katie or Jay or Director Hawkins?
Thanks for your report. I wanted to welcome Katie, who I met working out on the Dolores River in the field. So hopefully we will see you out there soon. I had a question about your report in the Southwest. I've heard reports of fish kills in the Animas River with the ash flows, and I'm wondering if we know what species are being affected in the main stem of the river.
So I can, on the break, email John Alves, who's the senior aquatic bio there, and he'll be able to get right back to me, and I can get back to you maybe at lunchtime. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? We'll continue on. Agenda item 5G, the Water and Resource and Power Authority. Mike Brode is not here, so no report there. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 6, the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program update from Jojo La and Carly Brown. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jojo La, CWCB staff, and I'm your new Endangered Species Policy Specialist. And in this position, I have the privilege of representing this board on both the Upper Colorado Recovery Program and the South Platte Recovery Program. Today, Carly and I are extremely enthusiastic to give you an update on the Platte River Recovery Program. There's a lot going on in this program, including a new transition into the future. So today, we'd like to spend some time giving an overview of the current activities, challenges and successes of the next steps, and the next steps for the future. So I'd like to start by giving a little background into the program. The Platte River Recovery Program is a partnership that was established in 2006 by the 3 states of Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, and the Department of Interior. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the piping plover, which was listed as threatened in 1986. Now, I've been trying to ask around to see if anyone can do an impression of a piping plover call. They have this beautiful call, and I have yet to find anyone. So if anyone can do it on this board, I'd love to hear it. Director Jan has a mad piping plover song. But anyway, this is an incredible species because, as you can see, this bird lays its eggs in the sand, and both its eggs and its chicks are sand colored. It's also an incredible species because within a couple hours of hatching, this bird could feed itself and leave the nest. In the upper right-hand corner, we have the interior least tern, which was listed as endangered in 1985. This bird can be identified by its black crown on its head, and this bird is extremely territorial. You can usually see them flying overhead over open bodies of water, dive bombing for its food, but they also dive bomb and defecate on their predators for protection. On the lower left-hand corner, we have the whooping crane, which everyone knows. This beautiful bird was listed as endangered in 1967. It's the tallest bird in America, and the Aransas wood buffalo population, which is the population that stops in the central Nebraska area, is the only wild and self-sustaining population left in the world. And finally, in the lower right-hand corner, we have this dinosaur fish, which was listed, the pallid sturgeon, which was listed as endangered in 1990. This species is incredibly hard to find, but once we do find it, it can be identified by its long nose. And one fun fact about the pallid sturgeon is that instead of having scales on its back, it has these bony plates on its back. These species are located in the associated habitat area in the Central Platte area in the Big Bend Reach. 2 rivers flow to the Central Platte area, Director Jan's South Platte Basin and Director Trick's North Platte Basin. And Director Mitchell knows this drive really well from this 5.5-hour drive from Denver to Kearney. So that's where all the meetings are held. So why are we, the CWCB, involved in a program that's located in Nebraska? This program has tremendous benefits for our state as well as the other states. Not only does it provide protection and conservation for the species downstream, but it also allows for water development in Colorado. This occurs through what we call a streamlined Section 7 consultation. And what this means is that participating water users can use the program's existing biological opinions and the existing mitigation measures to more quickly permit their projects on the ground. This is a tremendous benefit for Colorado because, as you can see here, these numbers in the past 13 years, 188 streamlined Section 7 consultations have occurred, and 147 of those have occurred in Colorado. So Colorado seeks tremendous benefit from this program. So this program provides a programmatic approach to water development and conservation. And this is quite a unique program because the definition of recovery for this program, unlike other recovery programs such as the Upper Colorado, is not tied to the definition of sufficient progress or the number of bird species. So if these bird species decide not to stop in Nebraska, we're not tied to that. Instead, this program is tied to milestones and completion of milestones. The program sets goals in and we are currently in the first 13-year increment, the first increment. This increment started in 2007 and will end next year in 2019. We have objectives for water, land, and adaptive management. And for the water objective, we must reduce shortages to target flows by 130 to 150,000 acre feet. We are currently providing approximately 100,000 acre feet to Nebraska. And as you can see here, this is the only milestone that we are not meeting in the first increment, and we will not be meeting in 2019. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. For land, we must acquire and protect 10,000 acres of land. We are meeting this milestone, and we've now protected over 12,000 acres of land for the species. And finally, we must conduct adaptive management. This is an approach where we research our activities, implement them on the ground, learn from those activities, and then adapt from those activities. We are meeting these milestones, and this is an incredibly successful program. In fact, we are the only program in the United States who have completed one full cycle of adaptive management. So it's an incredible success for the program. As mentioned before, we will not be meeting our water increment or our water milestone. So we are currently seeking congressional reauthorization of the program called the first increment extension. This is not a new second increment, but this is an extension to complete our water milestone. This extension will happen for another 13 years and will end in 2032. The current program is congressionally authorized through 2020, and currently our all 3 states' legislation has the draft legislation in front of them. We hope that this bill will pass at the end of this year or early next year, we hope. And finally, we must seek funding from Colorado, from the state. And last month, our Colorado representative, Donna Met, gave testimony in front of the Interim Water Resources Review Committee. It was well received, and Carly and I would be happy to talk about the reauthorization some more at the end of this presentation. So in the extension, the partners, we have also agreed upon additional milestones. As you can see in the first line, for the water milestone, we have reduced our water shortages goal from 130,000 to 120,000. This is a huge benefit both for Colorado and the program. The reason that we did this is because the last 10,000 acre feet of water is extremely expensive to get. And so we'll seek to get 120,000 acre feet and then determine how much it would take to get the last 10,000. As mentioned before, we're currently at 100,000 and we have 20,000 acre feet of water currently in development and in researching. For the land portion, we also have additional requirements to secure an additional 1,500 acres. We call this the plus up acres, and we currently have 120 acres already for that extension. And finally, we must continue to do adaptive management, continue monitoring, researching, implementing, and evaluating our projects. So how much did this cost in the first increment, and how much will it cost? The first increment cost a total of $157 million. In the next 13 years, the funds that will be required is an additional $106 million. As you can see, Colorado's contribution has remained relatively the same at $24 million. Colorado has always maintained that we would provide additional financial support rather than providing wet water, which it's a little bit more difficult to provide. One of the biggest challenges coming up in the next 13 years is this top line here, the marked decrease of federal funding. The first increment, they agreed to provide $127 million, and in the upcoming increment, it has been reduced to $78 million. Federal funding is not only the challenge coming up, but we are also seeing shortfalls in severance tax Tier 2 funding. For water, we also are seeing challenges in the future. The program continues to seek long-term solutions to water projects. So instead of projects such as short-term leasing or transfer as water, we seek to provide programmatic controlled water. The reason we did not meet the first milestone increment is because of a refocus away from the J2 reservoir. The J2 reservoir was a proposed re-regulating reservoir in the Central Platte area and would have provided controllable programmatic water to the area. Additionally, another challenge is that Colorado supported a proposal that would have been included in the draft legislation. This draft legislation would have allowed additional water from the Pathfinder Reservoir in Wyoming, which would have provided an additional 16,000 acre feet of water to the area. This is an incredible amount of water considering we only have 20,000 acre feet left to go. The legislation continued without the Pathfinder language as supported by Wyoming. Finally, the biggest challenge for water in the next 13 years is this choke point. We have a really big choke point. The choke point is located in the North Platte area, and it limits the amount of water that we can send down to the species, and it limits the amount of water we can release from Lake McConaughey from the environmental account. The program is currently constructing a berm to redirect waters away from residential areas and flood-prone areas. But in the upcoming years, the program will continue to seek ways to send more water down the stream and increase the channel capacity. There are also challenges for land management, one of the biggest of which is phreatophytes, specifically Phragmites. Phragmites is commonly known as common reed, and it's a noxious weed in Nebraska, and it's extremely erosion resistant, and it has these long roots that just don't move, and it channelizes the stream and affects how much water we can send down. Someone once told me that we actually don't control Phragmites, we don't burn it, we don't get rid of it, we just anger it some more. So that's how extreme Phragmites is. But I do want to emphasize the biggest challenge in probably the next 13 years of my career will be spent on this fish, the pallid sturgeon. We don't know much about this fish. We don't know much about the distribution, the spawning, and in fact, the pallid sturgeon occurs on the lower Platte and doesn't occur in the associated habitat area. The biggest question to the program is how do our managed flows affect the fish downstream? We are currently strategizing on how to address the pallid sturgeon. And finally, the last challenge is that we're seeing a departure of our leaderships due to retirement. This leaves a gap in knowledge for new generations such as Carly and I to come in and carry on the program. However, these challenges are not met without successes. When we first started this program 13 years ago, we had these 3 projects. The Tamarack Project, our Colorado project, which requires us to retime 10,000 acre-feet of water at the state line. Additionally, Wyoming, Nebraska also provided the water you see in those tables. In the increment extension, Colorado is not required to provide any more additional water. Instead, the program must provide water. And to get to that 120,000 acre-feet of water, we will do this through projects such as broad-scale recharge, slurry walls, and long-term leases. Another success story is that our species are doing really well. In fact, the biggest success of this program the first 13 years is that the lease turn is exceeding recovery goals. A recent 5-year review from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has recommended delisting the species from endangered, so just taking the species off the list. This is an incredible success for us. As you can see, the top dotted line shows the lease turn breeding pairs. In 2001, there were about 50 breeding pairs, and this year in 2018, you can see there's about 75, so that's an incredible increase. On the bottom line, the dotted line, is the piping plover numbers. In 2001, we started around 25 breeding pairs, and now we're a little less than 50 breeding pairs. Another success story is the whooping crane. When the whooping crane was first listed in 1967, you can see there were 48 birds. When this program started in 1997, there was 182 birds. And you can see that last number in 2016, 431 birds. And last year was the most crane use days in the central Nebraska habitat ever recorded. Finally, the biggest success of our program is the collaboration. Our program has been working very quietly behind the scenes and having these successes kind of without anyone knowing it. So it's a little bit of our downfall. So because when we came back and we said, oh, we're going to have to re-up our program, everyone's like, well, what program? I thought you guys were done, you know? So it's a little bit of our downfall. And a great story to this on how far we came is that back in the day when our leaders were negotiating the cooperative agreement, there are meeting minutes for the public environmental assessment outreach. There are meeting minutes in Nebraska where it would state the county sheriff was required to attend these meetings. And now we are going again through the environmental assessment process for the extension. And we had a public input meeting in Denver, and one person showed up. And it happened to be a Fish and Wildlife Service guy who happened to be in town. So that's tremendous success for this program, that it's a little bit quiet. We do this program through a series of water, land, and technical groups. I and other CWCB staff attend these groups. We work on the water issues and the land issues and the species issues, and that's how we get things done. Another contributing factor to success and a unique part of this program is the program is run by an outside non-Fish and Wildlife Service consultant called Headwaters, and they're a tremendous asset to our program. Finally, the last major success is the adaptive management. Through adaptive management, we have learned that on-site channel habitat creation is no longer effective, and we have focused our areas to off-site channel habitat creation. This is a huge success for our program because we would be building nests and habitats and sandbars on the river, and then they would just get washed away in a couple days. So this is a huge success. And to address our departing leaderships due to retirement, CWCB, Carly and I, and Director Chairman Jan also attended the Colorado's Turn to Pipe Up. Carly and I were quite proud of our turn and piper pun up there, but most thought we just couldn't spell. This workshop was a 2-day workshop with our leaders from Northern Water, Alan Berryman, who is already retired, and Deb Freeman. Denver Water's Representative Kevin Urey, who is also retired, and our Colorado representative, Donna Mentz. These discussions were really valuable to record institutional knowledge that we are missing, and we discussed past challenges, existing activities, and what our past leaders think the future looks like. So our next steps in the upcoming years will be this year and next year to seek congressional reauthorization, continue to seek state funds, refine our water action plan to get that last 20,000 acre feet of water, and continue to capture institutional knowledge from our leaders onto Carly and I. And with that, I'd like to take any question. Carly and I would like to take any questions, or if anyone wants to do their piping plover impression, also entertain that idea.
All right. Thank you, JoJo. We have a question, Director. Well, that's a pretty good impression. That is the piping plover. Bus has one cornered over there.
Right.
Director Wells.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I attended a little bit of the, whatever you called it, recording session, and I thought it was such an important idea because those 4 people have been involved almost from the beginning. And could you please tell your plover to be quiet? So it was really, really interesting. It is, as JoJo said, it's operated so successfully that only a water user faced with a potential Section 7 consultation understands how important it is to get the check mark and go through Fish and Wildlife without a hiccup. It really is very impressive. And it's one of the most ironic things is what JoJo mentioned at the end, which is that the habitat that is the most visited by the birds is the off-channel habitat, using gravel pits and other things, because of course when we started, what Fish and Wildlife wanted was flushing flows to create the islands in the middle of the stream. And they got some really good flushing flows in September of 2013. And it did nothing for the islands. So if you really want, designer habitat, then that's what we should do. And that's what's going on. Designer habitat built off channel. The reason the birds need the water, it's 4 inches of water, I believe, is that whatever their predators are don't cross the water. So they don't need the water for feeding. They need the water to keep the predators away from them. This is a very different sort of water need than we're used to dealing with. So it really has been a great success, and it's wonderful to see the next generation. They are known to the others as the millennials, by the way. So good to see the millennials taking over and also documenting the history. It's really quite successful.
Thank you, Director Wells. Any other questions? Director Brown.
I noted that the feds contribute money, we contribute money. Wyoming, did you just skip Nebraska, or do they write a check? No, this must have been a good one.
So the way that the program is constructed, Colorado acknowledged, Carly Brown for the record. Colorado, whenever we entered the program, we recognized that water was going to be harder to come by than money for us. So we took the route of retiming our 10,000 acre feet, and Wyoming has a smaller contribution monetarily. They contribute more with water. And then the idea is that Nebraska is also contributing with water. And JoJo, do you want to elaborate on that? Nebraska's water contributions. So that is the way that the program was constructed, was that that's why Nebraska is not paying in monetarily.
So this isn't a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have any idea what they valued their water at on a per acre foot basis?
Right now in Nebraska, the contracts that we have, the program has most recently taken with water empowered districts in Nebraska are on the order of $320 an acre foot. Very expensive water.
Wow. We got by cheap, didn't we, Mike? Okay. That's all I want more credit.
All right. Any other questions?
They did the math.
Yeah, Director Stoll.
I of the observations I've had over the last several years is there are a couple individuals in Colorado that from time to time, when we're talking about water shortages, think that getting out of this program would yield water to Colorado, which is absolutely erroneous. And it's been explained several times, but one individual's talked to the governor's offices in Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado as a result of this idea. So we just, it's testimony on how well this is operated and somewhat under the radar. We probably need to elevate the positive public relation aspect of it, of 147 projects being benefited here in Colorado. Because I agree with the philosophy of it's more appropriate for all of Colorado to contribute cash than certain amounts of water out of the Platte.
Thank you. I just want to say I enjoyed it's our turn to pipe up. Little. So you did a really good job. And grasping some of that knowledge of the past people is important because we're losing some of that. And it sounds like you guys are off to a good start. So it's well done. But I also wanted to, this is really important on the Platte. And it's not just important for those with federal projects. It's important for agriculture in the lower basin. I don't know if you know, in the late 90s, Parker Water and Sanitation District they were building Rudai Reservoir's on my mind, Ruder Hess. And so they were building that, and they needed to show that they could provide water at the habitat in Nebraska. And the way they did that is they came to Isle of Colorado, so my hometown, and they bought up agriculture land. And so they could show that they could release that ag water if necessary for the endangered species in Nebraska. And so they had that in place. And they were prepared to do that, and they got their permit to build the reservoir. And that would have continued had it not been for this 3 states program. So it shifted the burden from agriculture near the Front Range to right down at the state line. And so it's a very important program for us. And, Parker Water and Sanitation District has been really good neighbors to us, but they haven't had to use any of the water that they purchased. They own about 7% of the reservoir that I manage, the Pruitt Reservoir, and about 2,500 acres of farm ground down there. But they've been allowing farmers to farm it right now. So this is a really good success story. And I like to see your numbers. I mean, it's showing that it's working and we're doing a lot of good down in the area. So I would just ask you to continue with your enthusiasm and thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. We'll move on to agenda item 7. Technical assistance for federal cost share program. Oh, before we do that, I just wanted to mention, while on agenda item 5G, we didn't have a oral report from the Water and Power Authority. They did provide us with a written report. So if you want to look at that, I just wanted Director George reminded me of that. So I appreciate that. So go ahead, Brent.
All right. Good morning, members of the board. Brent Newman, Interstate Federal and Water Information Section. I'll be presenting on agenda item 7, Technical Assistance for Federal Cost Share Program. First, just a very brief history of this program and how it's kind of evolved over the past couple of years. This program was initiated by Steve Miller, longtime CWCB staffer before his retirement. It's been supported by this board in the appropriations in the 2017 and 2018 projects bills. As you can sort of read in the language here that was included in the projects bill, the concept here is to support Colorado water users who want to apply for federal funds, be that through a feasibility study, helping with the application process, or with some of the post-award costs that the federal government and their different restrictions will not allow. The concept here is it will help our different producers around Colorado and ditch companies on the front end. And by helping them with some technical assistance on the front side, working through the application process, or doing feasibility studies or capacity building within regional applications that will be more successful in our application process. And so far, that's proven pretty true over the past couple of years. How the board has expended some of these funds in 2017, 2018. Last year, we used some of these funds on the 2017 Bureau of Reclamation's funding opportunity announcement for the Salinity Control Program. We partnered up with Delta Conservation District, Chavano Conservation District, and Mancos Conservation District. You guys have heard me use this number before, but it's something I'm pretty proud of. With $2.5 million of state investment from this program, from the Water Supply Reserve Fund, and from the Colorado's Water Plan implementation grants, and then also some help from the loan program, we actually were able to leverage $26 million of federal investment in Western Slope agriculture and infrastructural upgrades. And the success of this program has been very much due to the hard work of our finance section and our local partners at the River District and the local conservation districts that we've partnered up with on this. This is a very brief presentation. This is the staff recommendation. These are the requests that we received over the past couple of months. First of all, $99,000 to Delta Conservation District. The Bureau of Reclamation has announced that they'll probably be having another FOA funding opportunity announcement for salinity control come out over the next year. We're thinking early 2019, and we'd like to go ahead and get some funds on the ground so these folks can start doing the feasibility studies to have a really successful application. And just given the success of last year and our good partnerships with the conservation districts, we're going to keep this up. The second is a separate project. The Natural Resources Conservation Service released some funds to the National Association of Conservation Districts recently. These are cost share funds. You have to pay up to 50% or more to receive these funds, but local conservation districts in Colorado were selected as target areas for these funds. And they just have to come up with some cost share, and you get funds for a district conservation technician to help out with applications for NRCS funds, for Bureau of Reclamation funds. So we partnered up with two different districts, Chavano District down in Montrose and then Delta Conservation District in Delta. Both were identified as target districts by this program. So we are assisting them in the cost share for their district conservation technicians. And finally, the third request is to the Mancos Conservation District in the Southwest, so they can also continue some capacity building and get ready for this upcoming funding opportunity announcement through feasibility studies and pre-engineering work for their applications.
All right, thanks, Brent. Any questions for Brent? We have a staff recommendation before us. What is your pleasure?
I'll make the motion to
Director Anderson.
I'll make the motion to approve staff's recommendation.
All right. It's been moved by Director Anderson, seconded by Director Gallagher, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 7. Is there any discussion? Director Stoll.
I have a question. Is that Chavano?
Nope, it's two different projects with the Delta Conservation District. One is going to be support for the salinity control program, FOA, and then the second one is the cost share with the NRCS program to help provide additional services for the district conservation technician program.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thanks, Brent. All right, agenda item 8, damaging high groundwater in the South Platte. Eric Sky.
Oh, good morning, Chairman Yon, members of the board. My usual 4 slides and a recommendation format is going by the wayside this morning. I figured with a criteria and recommendations document that pictures of text was just not something I wanted to do this morning for you. Anyways, just to give you a little bit of history on this damaging high groundwater program. Our involvement in dealing with these grant funds really started with House Bill 15-1178. That was the emergency dewatering grant program for Gilchrist, LaSalle, and Sterling. We were given $580,000 through the general fund and through the construction fund to come up with different programs to reduce the high groundwater, to monitor the high groundwater, and respond in an emergency fashion. But it was only in the Gilchrist, LaSalle, and Sterling areas. The second iteration of this program came with House Bill 17-1248, which was our 2017 projects bill. This allocated another $325,000 to the program, and it opened it up to the entire South Platte Basin. As we were working through this House Bill 15-1178 program, we realized that there was a lot more going on than just Gilchrist, LaSalle, and Sterling. And so we really needed to open up this geographic area to include more locations so that we could implement these projects. Now, this latest and greatest iteration comes from the 2018 projects bill, Senate Bill 18-218. It allocates another $500,000 to the program, and it really calls out the South Platte Roundtable Groundwater Technical Committee recommendations document. That was finalized back in February, and it includes a lot of projects that we've already been accomplishing with the Groundwater Technical Committee, and it was really putting that down on paper of what has been tried, what we'd like to see moving forward. And so this new criteria and guidelines document really tries to call out that more general aspect. The previous ones really talked a lot about dewatering wells and dewatering systems. And with this new iteration of the criterion guidelines, we wanted to make that a lot more general so that folks could come in with some of their own solutions to these problems and allow for a little more flexibility in the type of projects that we can see moving forward. We also changed the format, blatantly ripped off the Colorado Water Plan criteria guidelines and application document. And that was really just to try and make everything more standardized across the CWCB board, and makes it a lot easier to have an actual application form instead of going back and forth. One of the huge changes that's happened with this criterion guidelines is we are requiring a little more match funding. We're asking for 15% as opposed to 10%. That can be in kind or cash. And we also included language that folks could ask for a waiver if they could not meet that 15% match. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I am no economist, so if people do apply for that waiver, I will definitely be hanging out with our contracting folks at the agency to see if it's warranted. We also are requiring that all these applications be reviewed by the South Platte Roundtable Groundwater Technical Committee, State Engineer's Office, just to make sure that A, it's in line with the recommendations, that it is financially feasible as we've seen previously, and that they think that it'll meet their goals and all of that. And I think I already said that, but the caffeine's not quite kicking in, so who knows. I think the final major change there, as I already mentioned, is we just made everything just a little more general as far as the language goes. And so with that, I'd like to open it up for discussion. And the recommendation that is on the floor this morning is to the approval of the proposed criterion guidelines for damaging high groundwater response grants in the South Platte Basin.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Any questions for Eric? Director Wells.
Yeah, I'm just curious, did the provision that the staff could approve grants less than 100,000 come from this program of high groundwater, or was it borrowed from some other? I know we've voted on what the staff can approve here and there, but I just wasn't sure where this
that came from the thank you, Director Wells. That came from the previous iteration of this program,
okay.
The criterion guidelines for House Bill 17-1248.
Director Dutton.
Thanks, Eric, for your update. I had a comment in the just in the administration and in the reporting requirements. I think it would be appropriate to add in there just a specification about that we'd like to see a final budget and see how all the costs came out. The third bullet says confirms that all matching commitments have been fulfilled, but I would be interested in having people submit a table that just shows this is what they thought they would spend, this is what they did spend, and this is how. And then I think you have in there describing if there were any obstacles or changes, but making it clear to applicants that it would be good to see a final budget would be helpful.
Thank you, Director Dutt. Any other questions? We have a staff recommendation. Oh, I just wanted to say thanks for including the South Platte Basin Roundtable Technical Committee. I know they've been working long and hard, and John, Director Stolp, knows, that they've gone through several meetings, and so it's been a long road getting to some of these recommendations, and so it's good to have them because they know it in and out, inside and out.
Yeah.
So it's good to have them in the approval process. Yes, Director Stolp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me make a couple comments on the technical committee. It was really a great idea that come out of the roundtable, because with 50, 60 some members in the roundtable, it wasn't hardly practical, as past chairman, to discuss these things. And so the Metro and the South Platte roundtable have representation. The Division of Water Resources. When we can get Kevin Ryan there, he seems to be busy nowadays. But and then we have Eric. We had Andy Moore in the past. We have good representation from across the basin. And so it's really been a good technical group, and I think it's helped save a lot of time, at least on the board meetings. But I'd point out that many of these people have been to nearly all of the 41 or 2 meetings that we have had since our inception, and we're starting to spread them out a little further. But as this grant program comes forward, I'm sure we'll meet appropriately to digest them. And it really is pointed out the complexity of groundwater, whether it's in the South Platte or anywhere else.
All right. Thank you, Director Stelp. We have a staff recommendation. Director Wells.
I will move the staff recommendation to approve the proposed criteria and guidelines with the addition that recommended by Director Dutton.
It's been moved by Director Wells, seconded by Director Anderson, that we approve the staff recommendation on item 8 with the addition from Director Dutton. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Eric. We're scheduled for a break. We're running 10 minutes early, so we can take a little extra, 5 minutes extra, and we'll reconvene at 10:25. Thank you. We'll continue on with agenda item 9, emergency dam response funding. Kirk.
Good morning, Kirk Russell, CWCB Finance Section Chief. Agenda item number 9 is a action item, and it's related to this board's decision to add a modification to the projects bill in 2018, which modified the statute for an emergency dam repair cash fund that exists in statute 376122.5. And as I put in the memo, it focuses on situations where the dam safety branch of the Division of Water Resources is needing to respond to dangerous to health and safety of life or property situations around the state of Colorado. And that statute's been in place for several years, but in it had a limit of $50,000, and not sure why that number was chosen back when the statute was written, but many times in the last 10, 15 years, we've looked at that and said, wow, that's not going to get you much in a response to a dam safety issue. And so we looked at it and took a shot at a decent number and multiplied it times 10 and made it $500,000. Well, this particular motion is to change, or to have staff request from the treasurer to transfer from the construction fund that $500,000 over to the emergency dam repair cash fund. As indicated in the memo, the statute does indicate that anything recovered by dam safety goes back to CWCB, and that money will stay in that fund until such time as it's utilized. We will only come to the board when it's time to refresh this. And so at this point, the fund is actually at zero. We used $50,000 a couple years ago in response to, I believe it was two Buttes reservoir work. And I think there were several other entities in the state that were utilizing some funds to work on that as well. They certainly could have used more money out of this in response to that at that time. So that kind of started the conversation. And so recommendation as written is to direct staff to request treasurer to transfer the $500,000 over to this fund.
All right, thanks, Kirk. Any questions? Director George.
So just refresh us a little bit. We have a number of accounts that refresh because they should. It seemed to me some of those happen automatically, and then some have to come here to help me with that, because there's no reason, I would think, for them to be different. If it's good enough for us to say keep it refreshed because the purpose is there, should we be doing this automatically? What would you like?
Thank you. It's an interesting question, Director George. Again, we modified this in the recent projects bill just to change that dollar amount. And at the time when we were looking at doing this, I wasn't, you try to think back at the intent at the time, and I didn't know if there was a desire to maybe control things a little different. Those automatic refreshes in those, some of the funds that we have occurred much later in the process. So maybe there was some trust that maybe hadn't been established when this was put in place. I don't think I would be opposed to it. It certainly makes it easier. But then on the flip side of that, water rights and storage rights are certainly very important. And I don't know that there's a desire in that statute to maybe make sure that the checks and balances are in place, and maybe doing so with money could help that. But I certainly am not opposed to making it automatic. It certainly makes it easier on us. And it would be it would be right in line with many of our other funds if we did such.
Any other questions or comments? All right. So we have a staff recommendation to authorize the transfer of $500,000 to dam safety.
Just as an efficiency in government idea, I would ask to amend the motion to add whatever language we use in these other automatically refreshed. And then this one would come back in budget time and all that happens then, by my recollection, is that you just tell us this was so much used this year and so much added to maintain the automatic refresh of 500,000. So in fewer words, that would be my amendment.
May I respond to that? Director George, I'm concerned that we might have to change this actual statute, which would probably be in the projects bill in 2019. So maybe if I could table this 1 year and maybe it's discussed at the September Finance Committee meeting, and then we'll work with it.
All right. Well, I think you certainly have some expression of interest and intent for that efficiency. So leave it at that.
I agree. So you want to move for staff recommendation then?
Absolutely. In that many words, I do.
Been moved by Director George, seconded by Director Gallagher, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 9. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right. Thank you, Kirk.
Director Jan, thank you, board, for help getting the legislation through and for funding this. That fund was established at $50,000 in 1992, and I don't think I could drop a bulldozer on a dam in an emergency for $50,000 today. So much appreciated.
All right. Thanks for that comment, Mike. I did want to comment for the record that Director Hawkins was gone, I believe, on agenda items 7 and 8. So to tend to her youngin'. So we just want to make that clear for the record when we voted on those two. All right, we'll move on. Agenda item 10, renewal of Ute Water Conservancy District lease.
Kirk is tall.
Kirk is tall.
Good morning, Linda Bassey with the Stream and Lake Protection Section. This is agenda item 10, renewal of Ute Water Conservancy District lease of Rudai water for in-stream flow use in the 15-mile reach. Just want to note that this agenda item and the next two, we have partnered up with 3 major water districts to reach agreements on them providing or leasing water to us for in-stream flow use. And we're really happy to be engaged in these kind of partnerships. Agenda item 10 is an action item. Let me get geared up here. So in 2015, the board and Ute Water Conservancy District entered into a short-term lease of Rudai water for in-stream flow use in the 15-mile reach. And the district charged $7.20 per acre foot. The board approved that lease using the in-stream flow rule 6 two board meeting process, and that approval extended to any renewals of the lease. So the first increment, the lease was for 1 year, and it was renewable annually for up to 4 years. We renewed the lease in 2016 and 2017, and today we're recommending renewing it again to be effective through December 31st of this year. I think you know where all this is, but this isn't working. Rudai Reservoir is up on the right, and then it has to go down the frying pan and all the way down the Colorado River to the 15-mile reach. As a lot of water is getting released from Rudai and other reservoirs. Well, not as much as is needed, but that a lot of water gets released to be sent down to the 15-mile reach. Here's a table showing our previous implementation of the lease and how the amount of water we leased, the time periods that it was released, and the price. The price has remained steady at the $7.20 per acre foot. So the funding for this lease comes from the Species Conservation Trust Fund. In 2008, the legislature authorized an appropriation of up to $500,000 for the costs of water acquisitions for in-stream flows that would preserve or improve the natural environment in habitat where threatened or endangered or candidate species or likely to be candidate species are present. And so that is a perfect fit for this lease, which benefits the 4 endangered fish in the 15-mile reach. The water that's being used is water that the Ute District purchased in 2013 from the Bureau of Reclamation. They get 12,000 acre feet annually. from the Rudai Reservoir marketable yield for M&I uses, which in that contract include piscatorial uses, including delivery of water to supplement stream flow. Also, the decrees for Rudai Reservoir include piscatorial as a use. So the parties that have been involved with this lease over the last 3 years, obviously Ute Water, the Fish and Wildlife Service, who we work with on, they work on what the timing and need is for releases. Bureau of Reclamation, they operate the reservoir. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, we coordinate with them on issues related to this lease. And the Rudai Water and Power Authority, who they've been pretty instrumental in helping us do outreach to the public and have been supportive of this lease. And April Long, some of you met her yesterday at the Rudai Reservoir celebration, and she is the new president of the authority. She's in the audience, just wanted to point her out. So the use of this water, we have 2 in-stream flow water rights in the 15-mile reach. They're both effective July 1st through September 30th, 581 CFS through the whole 15-mile reach. And then there's an additional increment of 300 CFS in the last 2 miles of the 15-mile reach. You heard a little bit about the target flows earlier this morning. At this point in time, the target flow is 810 CFS for the month of July. There is a formula by which they calculate that I am not qualified to explain. I think Michelle could if anyone wants to delve deeper into that. The water will go down to the reach. It also will go through the Rudai Power Plant when it's released from the reservoir, go through the Orchard Mesa Irrigation District Power Plant, and then to the fish. So it's really important for us to be providing water to the 15-mile reach. This is some pretty dramatic effects that happen when flows get low. When flows go below 700 to 800, the fish start losing habitat, especially riffles, and that interferes with their ability to travel back and forth and feed and find pools to hang out in, and they can become stranded. It also leads to crowding when there are only certain areas that have enough water for them. They get crowded and increased competition for food. When flows go below 400, all of those conditions worsen, and when the water is low and clear, then they become more vulnerable to avian predators, and they actually can be sunburned. They can sustain damage from the sun because there's no water, murky water above them. Also, the drier it gets, the aquatic macroinvertebrates suffer, and they form the food base for the fish. I also was told that as flows get lower and lower, the fish are also vulnerable to terrestrial predators. I guess they can just run out there and grab them. So every drop counts. We have a couple of hydrographs here to show you what flows are like this year in the 15-mile reach. The peak was low and early, and you can see that in early July, it's down pretty low. In fact, Michelle told me what it was today, and I already forgot. I think it was, she said 410 CFS. And this shows the red line on this graph is 2002. So we're doing a little better than that earlier in the year, but then now we're just down as low as it was in 2002. And where the pink meets the blue is the median hydrology, so we're well below the median. So the benefits of the lease are to help address those habitat conditions. We have heard some concerns in past years by stakeholders, mainly anglers on the Frying Pan River. They like to see flows not exceed 275 CFS, so they're able to get out there and wade. And so we have tried to work to find a compromise to send this water down to the endangered fish and still help maintain that recreation economy on the Frying Pan. And we've presented and discussed the lease with stakeholders at public meetings every year of the lease implementation. The first year, Ted Kowalski and I went, and then Michelle has been involved. And there's a meeting, a RUDI operations meeting on August 9th that Michelle is going to attend and present on this lease app because I'm going on vacation. We also need to coordinate with CPW to ensure that releases don't interfere with brown trout fall spawning. So there are all kinds of competing issues that we have to address for just about every lease that we do. So I've amended the staff recommendation. In the memo, it says that we're asking the board to approve a 1-year renewal of the lease. We talked with the Ute District, and they would like the lease to be concurrent with its contract year with the Bureau of Reclamation. So that is why we're amending it to we're recommending that the board approve renewing the lease through December 31st of this year, subject to 3 conditions. The first is that releases of RUDI water under the agreement won't cause releases out of the reservoir to exceed 300 CFS and will not cause flows in the frying pan below the reservoir to exceed 350 CFS. So staff and Fish and Wildlife Service will coordinate with the Bureau of Reclamation to ensure this condition is met. And there are a lot of different releases being made, so there is some coordination involved there. The second condition is that staff will consult and coordinate weekly with CPW staff on proposed releases to minimize impacts to the fishery below RUDI. And the third is that at this August 9th meeting, the Bureau's annual RUDI operations meeting, staff will present on the lease and discuss lease implementation with local stakeholders. I do want to add that Michelle has been on the HUP call this morning, and she said that flows are so low on the frying pan that the anglers would like to see some more releases. So I don't think we'll hear those same concerns this year because as with every river, they're all hurting. So with that, I'm available to answer questions.
All right, thanks, Linda. You have any questions for Linda? Director Wells.
I don't have any questions in particular about this lease, but there are 2 RUDI reservoir release contracts right next to each other in the agenda, and therefore it's notable that one costs $7.20 an acre foot, and the other one is $65.25 an acre foot. And one's for summer, one's for winter, one's for the 15-mile reach, one's for the frying pan. But I'm just trying to figure out why it is. Could we just lease from Ute for the winter too and get the really great deal price-wise? I'm just trying to reconcile that dramatic difference. So, $228,000 so that the fishery below the frying pan can be preserved, which is fine. These are all good things. I'm just trying to figure out the difference in the cost and whether, as we learned yesterday, that the repayment will be done on RUDI by the end of next year, and whether that might not reduce costs, generally speaking, in 2020.
Well, first, we would not be able to lease Ute water in the winter. Well, we wouldn't be able to lease Ute water for use in the 15-mile reach. Excuse me, for use on the frying pan, because that water can only be used in Ute's service area, which does not extend that far up to the Frying Pan River. And I don't believe that water is available from Ute at that time. I guess it's clear that each district has its own way of establishing a price for lease water. And in the next agenda item, I'll explain that the river district has a water marketing policy, and that is the price that was, they have a whole list of prices and uses in that policy. And there's nowhere else to shop, so.
Director Hawkins.
This isn't in my basin, so I don't want to get out ahead of the representative from the basin, but I just wanted to commend you and the staff for working on this over the years, and wanted to say that in my basin, I am hearing increasing concerns about the establishment of new in-stream flows, and I think that the use of a voluntary and compensated program to establish important objectives like endangered fish recovery on the 15-mile reach. I'm just very supportive of this in concept and wanted to thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Linda? All right, we have a staff recommendation. Director George.
I move that we adopt the amendments and the staff recommendation as published to us.
Ooh, there's a fight for the second. It was moved by Director George, seconded by Director Dutton, that we approve staff recommendation. Is there any further discussion on agenda item 10? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thanks,
Thank
Linda.
you. We also want to express our thanks to the Ute District for making
Absolutely.
this water available.
Thank you.
I just need to.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 11, and that's the second lease that was referred to by Director Wells with the River District out of Rudeye Reservoir. So we'll give Linda a little time to bring up her PowerPoint.
11 Franklin. It's another Rudeye. Not 10 though. It was on that flush here. Sorry, excuse me. Only we had no music to play.
All right.
Momentary glitch. Okay, Linda Bassey, Stream and Lake Protection Section. This is agenda item 11, Colorado River Water Conservation District lease of Rudeye water for winter in-stream flow use on the Frying Pan River. This is an action item. The background in 2017, actually at one of the public meetings on the Rudeye lease from the Ute District, we started talking with representatives of the Rudeye Water and Power Authority and the Roaring Fork Conservancy. And I'll digress for one moment. Heather Lewin from Roaring Fork Conservancy is here. She's been very supportive and instrumental in getting this going. And the River District, we all started talking about potentially finding a way to lease some water to benefit flows in the Frying Pan in the winter. So that led to the offer of a lease of water from the River District, a short-term lease of up to 3,500 acre-feet of water that the district holds in Rudeye. We would use that water to preserve and improve the natural environment to a reasonable degree, and would pay for this lease with funds authorized by Section 3760-123.7, and that's our $1 million in the construction fund. It gets refreshed annually up to $1 million for the cost of water acquisitions for in-stream flow use. Map, there's Rudeye Reservoir again, and it would just be released and used in the Frying Pan directly below the reservoir. So the Rule 6 process, again, it's a minimum of 2 board meetings to consider and decide whether to accept an offer of water. Your first look at this proposal was at the May board meeting. No one from the public requested a hearing, so that you may take final action at this meeting. We've requested recommendations from CPW, BLM, and the Forest Service. You have a letter from CPW in your packet. And we've provided notice to the in-stream flow subscription mailing list and the Division 5 substitute water supply plan notification list. So the water that is would be used under this lease is up to 3,500 acre feet that is the district holds under a contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. The contract is for 5,000, but we are just talking about leasing 3,500. And that contract authorizes M&I uses, and it also expressly authorizes the district to use water to supplement winter in-stream flows in the Frying Pan River. And the decreed uses of the reservoir do include piscatorial. So we have an in-stream flow on the Frying Pan from the confluence with Rocky Fork Creek, which is just below the reservoir, to the confluence with the Roaring Fork. The winter in-stream flow rate, which is the relevant rate here, is 39 CFS. And under that, under the contract with Reclamation, that water is only available for in-stream flow use from January 1st to March 31st. The natural environment, there's a gold medal trout fishery, renowned for abundant quality-sized brown and rainbow trout. They primarily feed on mottled sculpin and aquatic macroinvertebrates. And in the winter, when low temperatures are combined with low flows less than 70 CFS, that can result in the formation of anchor ice building from the stream bed up, which can dramatically impact the number of aquatic macroinvertebrates and disrupt their life cycles. And it can also adversely impact trout fry that live in the spaces in the substrate. So the proposed use of the leased water is that we would use it to preserve the natural environment by supplementing the existing 39 CFS in-stream flow when needed. I think it's very rare that we would be making that use because the Bureau typically releases 39 CFS. The other use would be to preserve by protecting water up to 70 CFS. And that would help to meet, Roaring Fork Conservancy did some studies, and CPW has cited some studies showing what the flow rates that are recommended to prevent this anchor ice. The Roaring Fork Conservancy, CWCB staff, and River District will coordinate on requesting releases by Reclamation. And the proposed use is authorized by decree and contract. The district's water leases are governed by its water marketing policy. John Courier from the River District is here to answer any questions that the board has of the River District. The district and the board will staff will negotiate terms of a one-year lease, which will address the amount of water to be leased, the timing, the process for requesting releases, the price and payments, and any other terms that we deem necessary. And we're working with the district's council. They have a standard form and we have a standard form. And I think they're going to be able to use our standard form, but we're going to have to interject some extra language. So we're working on that. In-stream flow rule 6 requires you to evaluate several factors. Because this is a lease of water that's been stored in priority and will be released for delivery to the in-stream flow reach, the factors of historic use and historical return flows and material injury to existing water rights really don't apply here, so that you don't need to consider them. This lease will promote the maximum utilization of waters of the state by allowing this stored water to be released and beneficially used to preserve and improve the natural environment. It will generate hydropower at most times when it's released, and then it will be available for subsequent use downstream of the in-stream flow reach. And we've consulted with the federal and interstate section. The proposed lease doesn't negatively impact any interstate compact issue. We can use this leased water. It's called stacking in the rule. We can combine it with the existing in-stream flow rate to achieve a greater level of protection for the natural environment by meeting those recommended flows to improve the natural environment. We've consulted with Division 5, Division Engineer, and he has indicated that release and delivery of this water through the Frying Pan River to its confluence with the Roaring Fork will be administrable for in-stream flow use. And so the anticipated benefits of this lease is that we'll bring flow rates up to the decreed rates when needed. help meet those higher flows to prevent anchor ice and benefit both trout and macroinvertebrates in the winter by preventing the anchor ice and by providing an increased amount of usable habitat. The $1 million in the construction fund, the board adopted policy 19 to govern those expenditures. And policy 19 requires us to bring you certain information when we're asking you to authorize an expenditure from that source of funding. The cost of the transaction is one, and so the lease price is $65.25 per acre foot, plus a $400 non-reimbursable application fee. For 3,500 acre feet, that would total $228,775. We would pay that with the funds out of the 1 million. And the River District updated its water marketing policy in January of this year to include in-channel uses. And they have identified different reaches where different reservoirs, I think it's for both Wolford and Rudeye, and different river reaches where that water would be used and what the price for each of those uses would be. And so that is the basis for the price of this lease. Other costs related to negotiating and finalizing the lease agreement, they can be absorbed as part of our everyday business of CWCB staff and the AG's office. Another policy 19 factor that the board needs to look at when considering spending money on an acquisition that will improve the natural environment is what will the balance between consumptive and non-consumptive needs and uses of water be on the stream? This proposal doesn't appear to affect it. There's not a whole lot of consumptive use on the frying pan in the winter. The released water most likely will run through the hydropower plant and generate power, and then will be used non-consumptively for in-stream flow use, and will be available to the next diverter in priority below the in-stream flow reach. And we are not sure exactly who or where that would be. So it will meet non-consumptive needs on the Frying Pan River as we've identified. Colorado Parks and Wildlife provided some additional information, additional to what they provided at the last board meeting. Again, policy 19 requires an additional biological analysis when we're using the money spending money on a lease or an acquisition to improve. One of those factors is the degree to which the acquired water will provide additional usable habitat in the subject in-stream flow reach. And I think on the last page of your memo, I've listed all of the factors that CPW is supposed to consider. I'm only talking about the ones that actually apply because a couple of them just really don't fit here. They refer to summer months. So based upon CPW habitat research in the 80s and 90s and on other analyses, one that was performed as part of the Rudeye Marketing Policy Round 2 EIS, wintertime flows in the Frying Pan River of up to 100 CFS are optimum for brown trout adults and for egg incubation. The brown trout spawn in the fall starting October 15th. Brown and round rainbow trout habitat improves as flows increase up to 100 CFS. We also need to look at an analysis of the degree to which acquired water benefits the natural environment. I think we've already covered that. And also an analysis of the degree to which acquired water doesn't result in hydraulic conditions detrimental to aspects of the natural environment intended to benefit from the acquisition. In short talk, that would be, is it too much water? At what, we don't want to be acquiring water that's actually going to be not beneficial to the natural environment. So again, based on this marketing program, final supplemental EIS, for nearly all trout life stages, flows have to exceed 100 CFS before there's any reduction in overall habitat. Stakeholder outreach on this lease. We've met with Council for Southeastern to discuss concerns, and we talked about that a little bit in May, and to address those concerns, the lease agreement will contain an acknowledgement by CWCB and the River District that this lease will be implemented in accordance with the Frying Pan Arkansas Act and the operating principles. And Southeastern is aware of this and thinks it addresses their concerns. I got to talk to Lee Miller yesterday at the celebration. Staff is working with the district to obtain approval of the lease by the Bureau of Reclamation. Under these contracts, any lease of water or any transaction with water has to be approved by Reclamation, and that is moving along, and we don't anticipate any problems with that. So before I move to staff recommendation, do you have any questions for me or for John Courier?
Any questions for Linda? I have a few. It struck me, as it did Director Wells, that the price difference. You know, I'm not opposed. This seems like a really good idea. And I was just wondering, you know, was there any negotiations in the price with the River District, or is it just by the book? You know, we're doing a good thing in their district, and I mean, it looks like it could benefit the area down below there and benefit the fish. And I was just wondering if there was, you know, we do in other areas accept donations, and we do in other areas, you know, different things like that. And I was just wondering if there were any kind of negotiations, and maybe John could answer that, or you, however you would like.
I would love it for John to come up here, okay. But I will say, I will say that we did ask if the $400 application fee could be waived, and we did not attempt to negotiate on their established price. But I will turn it over to John.
Yes, President Yan, Director Wells, that's an astute question. And the way I look at the pricing question is, I think we're talking a little bit apples and oranges. The Colorado River District runs a water marketing enterprise. It's my job to make sure that enterprise runs in the black. Ute Water is using part of their water supply that's basically held in reserve for emergency, and they're basically, without putting words in Ute's mouth, you know, recovering the annual O&M expense, you know, while we're trying to recover some of the capital costs associated with that. That said, our water marketing pricing is based upon what we would sell water from Rudeye or Wolford for ag use. Our M&I costs per acre foot is much, much higher, a factor of probably 4 to 6 times higher. So, you know, we essentially subsidize ag. And so this is, even though this is significantly higher, 10 times higher almost than the O&M cost, it's still, you know, from a water supply perspective, a subsidized cost. So simple answer. Hopefully that helps.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Director George.
I would just add the historical context of all of this too, because that's where this pricing comes from, is that once Rudeye was built, then federal law says users need to pay for the federal taxpayers' investment in this project. So what, 20 years ago, maybe now, maybe more, Bureau of Reclamation set up the situation whereby they started marketing water. And it's a very similar situation that we went through with Chatfield and Lake Nighthorse. Is, as a public entity, who should we be buying the water for future uses so it's available? Because the Bureau is sitting here saying, we have deadlines, we need to pay off the debt within a timeline. So the River District stepped up and bought a quantity of this water for the future. And I suspect that's where all the pricing comes from, and that's certainly where the availability of the water comes from. So I think that's the historical context that you want to look at, the pricing and the availability. A lot of other users up and down the Colorado main stem system did the same thing. the Basalt Water Conservancy District, West Divide Water Conservancy District. I don't know who else. Certainly Ute. And the Ute, of course, owns large quantities for various purposes. So it's a different arrangement for them for the short-term leases. This one is just a business model. So I think it actually, to me, I'm delighted that the River District bought the water and that we have it for this purpose today. That just shows the importance of Rudi as a storage unit where it is and the values that will continue to come for our lifetimes.
Thank you, Director George, for that explanation. The other thing I was wondering, I know in the next one coming up, Northern is going to, they're donating the water for us, but also have a provision in there that they're only going to release what they actually need. And I wondered if that was considered, instead of buying a lump sum, because it is much more expensive, if we could just buy up to $3,500 at the price in case the flows are higher and we don't need it, or can we carry that over to another year? I was just curious about that.
Well, President Yan, the simple answer is no. I mean, the River District's contracting procedure, without going back to our board and seeking additional authorization or revisions in our marketing policy, are basically take or pay contracts.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So for this one, it's a take or pay contract. If we go on in the future, I think those are the kind of things that we would be willing and able to at least discuss with our board.
Right. Yeah, because I could see where we have plenty of flow in the wintertime, maybe in some instance, and we don't use any of it, and it's a take or pay. If since it's a benefit for everyone in the area, I was just wondering if that was a possibility as well, because you could still use that water however you were going to use it or lease it, because it's a wintertime flow. You could still lease it to an ag user if we don't use it or something like that. So that's all I was getting at. And then what would this water have been used for if it wasn't used for this?
You just as Director George stated, the River District has stepped up over time, basically in order to repay the marketable yield, purchased large volumes of water. And that's exactly where Ute's water came from. It came from a concerted effort by the River District to get West Slope entities to purchase marketable yield before the repayment date came up and the price escalates to infinity, which is so with that background, we have multiple contracts totaling in the neighborhood of 15,000 acre feet, and they're not fully subscribed. So actually this is water that would not be likely marketed to somebody else because it's basically held in reserve.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is, do we get any credit? I don't know how this all works. I'm from the South Platte. Do we get any credit in the 15-mile reach if any of this makes it there, or how does that work?
Well, to the extent that, I think that's something that we can and should be working on to get credit for it, even though it's earmarked specifically for the frying pan. And the way this contract was written, this use was explicitly written into this contract when it was obtained many, many years ago, before my time at the River District. But yes, we should be getting credit for this in the 15-mile reach, and we should be working to make sure we get credit for it in the 15-mile reach. And to the extent that water supply suggests, it should be running through the Grand Valley Power Plant at the head of the 15-mile reach as well.
All right. Well, thanks for answering all those questions. Director Wells?
I just had one more sort of repeat. So I think I heard yesterday that the repayment will be complete at the end of 2019. Did anybody else hear that from the Bureau? Okay.
Yeah.
And so would that possibly, is that an occasion for the River District to revamp its marketing policy, and might that possibly reduce the price in the future?
We paid lump sum for this. At the time these contracts were purchased, I think we actually borrowed some money from CWCB for several of these contracts, and we paid them off in lump sum to the reclamation. So it really isn't going to change that, because we still have that capital outlay for that water. Good question.
Director Anderson.
I'm just curious, do you have farmers buying water at that rate, at $67.25?
Are you from Rudai? Blunt
Yes.
answer, no. And it's more by virtue of location and proximity and other available water supplies. There simply is, as a practical matter, there isn't an ag need below Rudai.
Thank you.
Any other questions for John? Thanks, John. for
Thank
answering
you.
those
And
questions.
certainly happy to answer any more questions if they arise.
Linda.
I just remembered something that I have not had a chance to talk to John about, but I spoke with Bob Rice of the Bureau of Reclamation yesterday, and he suggested that we might want to make this one-year contract renewable. That way, if we wanted to do it again, it would be easier to get an approval. It would be similar to the Ute where we just renew it. I don't know. I don't even know where did he leave?
No, he's
Oh, there you are. I don't know. What I would do, I think, is just amend this recommendation to ask for the latitude to explore that with the River District.
And because this was a new idea for our board, they approved in-channel uses for a one-year basis. So if I think if you made this renewable, it would be contingent upon the river districts also renewing this for more than 1 year, which we would simply have to bring to our board.
Oh, should I get that latitude to explore?
Yeah, I think that would make.
All right, thank you. Late breaking. Yep. So with that, I am ready to move to staff's recommendation unless there are more questions.
So did you want to amend it or not? I'm just thinking since this is our first year and we're just trying to figure this out, and maybe we can change a few things if we do it differently, I don't know if there's potential or not.
Well, I would suggest amending it to give staff the discretion to explore making it a renewable lease agreement. I'll get to it though. I think these first.
Okay.
So staff recommends that the board conclude that the proposed acquisition of an interest in water by lease from the River District is appropriate to preserve and improve the natural environment of the Frying Pan River from its confluence with Rocky Fork Creek to its confluence with the Roaring Fork River to a reasonable degree, to determine that the acquired interest in water would be best utilized by using it to preserve the natural environment of the Frying Pan River at flow rates up to the existing decreed in-stream flow water right in that reach, and by using it to improve the natural environment in that reach by protecting flows above the decreed in-stream flow rates at rates not to exceed 70 CFS. Excuse me. To approve the expenditure of up to $228,775 from the construction fund for the lease. Here's what I will add in a bullet. To authorize CWCB staff to work with the district on exploring whether the lease should be renewable, and to authorize the director to execute a water lease agreement with the Colorado River Water Conservation District once we have it all negotiated.
All right. You've heard the recommendation. Director George?
I had noticed the authorization of the director to conclude the negotiation. So that will be part of my motion. It's up to staff, well, both staffs really. There's a little bit of exploring new ground here, but we've had enough of a conversation here that I think the director has a sense of where we want to be, which is the best business bargain that is possible with our good partner, the River District, for as many years as makes sense in meeting this part of our mission. So I would move that we adopt staff recommendation as amended in the conversation on agenda item 11. And if something significant changes, I guess you'll just have to come back and talk to us.
All right. It's been moved by Director George, seconded by Director Hawkins, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 11 with the amendment. Is there any discussion? Director Wells.
I have one comment on the renewal. I do think that Director Jan's point about take or pay is important, and that if the water remains in the reservoir, it can certainly be sold to someone else. And so, I mean, Denver Water does take or pay in some contracts, but sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. So I think we should, I wouldn't want to be stuck with take or pay for another 5 years if in fact there's a possibility not to do it. So I don't mind renewing the relationship, but I think to the extent there are some ways that it could be a little better, I wouldn't want to preclude improving it either. So maybe those two things are not mutually inconsistent.
Yeah.
Duly noted.
Okay.
We will
Thank you, Linda.
keep that in mind.
Is there any further discussion? All right. Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Agenda item 12, Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. Is this Kaylee?
Good morning, Kaylee White with staff, CWCB staff. This is agenda item 12. It is a dedication of water for in-stream flow from Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District for mitigation releases to use for in-stream flow on the Cache La Poudre River in Water Division 1. So as a brief background, Northern, acting through its Northern Integrated Supply Project Water Activity Enterprise, their NISP enterprise, is pursuing NISP to provide 40,000 acre feet of new reliable water supply to its 15 East Slope recipient participants. And through that process has committed to make reservoir releases for mitigation and enhancement of environment in the Cache La Poudre, among other things. But this is the part of the project that we're working on for the in-stream flow. So the acquisition proposal is this is an offer of a contractual interest in water in what's called a mitigation release pursuant to a new statute to use to preserve and improve the natural environment to a reasonable degree in Cache La Poudre. It's a potential long-term lease or a long-term dedication up to 14,350 acre feet to be released at a rate of 18 to 25 CFS year-round, every day, from the planned Glade Reservoir. There's no direct cost to CWCB. We'll just absorb the negotiations. There's a water court application. The Attorney General's office will be involved, but no external direct cost to approve here. So here's a map of the area. The Glade Reservoir will be close to the mouth of the Poudre Canyon. And the water would be released from the reservoir to the Poudre River, flow about 13 miles downstream, just past the town of Fort Collins. So I have several people here today from Northern. Peggy Montano is here as the attorney, Brad Wynn, the general manager, and Jerry Gibbons is operations manager, I believe. And I'll call on them, or you're welcome to ask questions of them too. During the process, I've been working with Linda Bassi and Jennifer Mealy of the AG's office on this project, and the two of them worked with Northern on the stakeholder meetings, developing the bill and proceeding to get the statute in place. And Jay Skinner's here from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, who has helped us with the recommendations for the flow rates. So your Rule 6 process, as you have heard in the last two presentations, there's a 2-meeting process. This is the first of the 2 meetings. No action is required here. This is the first look. Within 20 days of this meeting, any person can request a hearing. If no hearing is requested, then we may come back to you, and we're planning to come back to you in September for final approval. We've requested recommendations as required from Parks and Wildlife, from BLM, and the Forest Service. And we provided notice to the in-stream flow subscription mailing list and the SWSB notification list for Water Division 1. So the proposal for dedication, as I said, is up to 14,350 acre feet. To be protected for in-stream flow as a, quote, protected mitigation release. And this is pursuant to the new statute 3792-1028 is where the bill is codified. The bill is Senate Bill 18107. It was signed into law in April of this year. So that statute allows an existing water right that has not been developed yet, if it's stored in new storage capacity, in a new reservoir capacity, to be released and protected for in-stream flow use by CWCB, so long as the water is delivered ultimately to its intended beneficiaries downstream, the project participants. It does require a water court application where CWCB will be a co-applicant with the owner of the water right, in this case, Northern. The dedication is guided by the NISP Fish and Wildlife Mitigation and Enhancement Plan, which I included just the executive summary in your board packet, and an intergovernmental agreement between Northern and Parks and Wildlife, which is also in your board packet. So the water would be used to preserve and improve the natural environment in the Cache la Poudre from the reservoir near the canyon mouth down through the city of Fort Collins to where they'll take the water back out of the river for delivery. The releases is between 18 and 25 CFS year round. The actual monthly breakdowns are in the draft lease that's in part of your packet. And it's ultimately to meet flows in the stream of up to 50 in the winter, up to 55 CFS to preserve the natural environment, and above that between 55 and 85 CFS to improve the natural environment in the winter. And the numbers in the summer are up to 85 CFS to preserve the natural environment, and between 85 and 130 CFS to improve the natural environment in the summer. So if the flows are higher than that, then we couldn't actually protect those releases. So the natural environment of the stream, it has a diverse fishery. It's native and non-native species, and transitions from a cold water fishery to a warm water fishery as you move down the river and reach into the plains. So in the upper reaches, supports good rainbow and brown trout fishery where this water is mainly going to be used. So the proposed method of this acquisition is we will negotiate with Northern the terms of the water delivery and dedication agreement. We have a pretty good draft, working draft in your board packet. And then we will, after we get that done, and as part of that agreement, we will become co-applicants in a water court application pursuant to the new 1028 statute. And then the operations, the reporting, administration will be directed by the agreement, the statute, the water court decree. So Rule 6 factors that the board needs to consider is, as we pointed out in the last presentation, as Linda pointed out, this is a reservoir release of water stored in priority. So some of the factors are not as applicable as if we had changed a water rate from irrigation to in-stream flow use. So because of that, we don't have to worry about the historical use, historical return flows. Material injury to existing water rights shouldn't be affected because this is new stored water. This will promote maximum utilization of the water, be beneficially used in the river, and then it will also be, the same water will also be used by project participants for subject uses downstream. And in consulting with our interstate staff, this will not negatively impact any interstate compact. So as part of the Rule 6 factors, we have a stacking ability of water rights, so that this contract water could be stacked upon an existing in-stream flow in the stream if we had one, which we don't. So this is the only in-stream flow, will be the only in-stream flow water in the Cache la Poudre in this reach when it comes about, unless we have other acquired water rights to add to it, which we can always add those to achieve the greater level of protection, up to the flow rates that we're finding here. So administrability, haven't yet had the full discussion with Division 1, but we will do that with the Division 1 engineer before the next meeting. So our recommendation is to consider acquiring the contractual interest and to direct staff to file the water court applications, identify questions or concerns. I think Jerry Gibbons may have a few things to say about the operations of it, and then the other folks are here to help field questions.
All right. Thank you, Kaylee. Jerry, if you'd please state your name, who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, board. My name is Jerry Gibbons. I'm Director of Operations at Northern Water. I've also been in charge of some of the NISP mitigation planning efforts as we've progressed through those efforts in the last 2 or 3 years with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. With me today, as mentioned, is Brad Wind, our General Manager, and Peggy Montano, our Legal Counsel. We wish Eric Wilkinson could have been here with you today. Fortunately for him, unfortunately for us, he's on his retirement vacation up in Canada, and he sends his regards to you. I know he wished he could have been here, but he will likely be here at our next meeting. So Kaylee gave you a good overview of the proposed operations. I know this board has acted on the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Plan last September, so I won't spend a lot of time rehashing that plan. We did want to bring up a couple of notes on the reservoir release dedication. First, Eric and all of us at Northern Water wanted to pass on our thanks to CPW staff, to CWCB staff, to several folks on this board in their development of Senate Bill 18-170. That was, for those of you that were at those meetings, quite a monumental effort. We had several very long meetings over the period of the last year, and I think we got to a point where the bill worked for our particular project, but also a bill that will work for future projects and provide us another tool to meet environmental flows within the state. So we thank everyone for those efforts. A couple of just clarifications on our particular dedication. We did want to mention that in a couple of places in both the notice and the staff memo, it was referred to as a donation. And in this particular case, to be consistent with the statute, this is a dedication. The NISP Water Activity Enterprise will maintain ownership of the water and the water right, and it will be dedicated to that in-stream flow use for that particular reach. And we just wanted to make sure that was clear. The second thing we wanted to make clear was I believe the notice only mentioned the Gray Mountain water rights for storage in Glade Reservoir. The Gray Mountain rights are about half the yield into the reservoir. The other half of the yield into Glade Reservoir would be the South Platte Water Conservation Project, which has a different set of water rights associated with that, and we would want to be able to use those water rights as well. And you'll see in the draft dedication agreement that those water rights are spelled out pretty clearly, and so that'll give you a better idea of what we're proposing there. And then the last thing we just wanted to mention real quickly was there's been some question as to what happens when stream flow is greater than the stream flow required to improve or enhance or improve the natural environment. And based on the mitigation and enhancement plan we've developed with CPW, we will continue to make our releases. So our releases will continue. They'll be basically 365 days a year. Now, there are a couple of notes in the mitigation plan when the releases would not be made. One of those is if water quality in the river were to degrade to a point where our participants could not beneficially use the water for M&I uses, then that would be a time when we may not make those releases. Another time would be is when the demand from the participants isn't great enough to make the releases. Now, full build-out conditions for the reservoir, we don't expect demand to be an issue. That was a factor in how we developed those release rates with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. But there could be days here and there, particularly as we're getting to those full build-out conditions when the full release could not be made. But we will make those releases even if the flows are above those determined by CPW to improve the natural environment. We don't expect or need those to be protected by the mitigation plan or by the dedication agreement. Those will continue to ride on top of native flows, natural flows, and water users will still be able to appropriate exchange against those natural flows as they always have been and will continue to do so. So I hope that gives you a little bit more information as you make your decision. We'd be available, any of us, for any questions you may have.
All right. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Director Wells.
Thank you. I didn't participate in those excruciating meetings, but I heard about them. And I know that a lot of people struggled with why would this legislation be necessary. But now that I see the agreement, I understand completely why it's necessary, so that the water will actually stay in the stream instead of getting dried up. So I'm pretty excited about not having dry up in the river. That's at whatever flow, that's better than the existing condition, which is nice. I'm looking at the map. So as I understand it, what Northern has agreed to do is to use the river instead of a pipeline for some portion of its deliveries. Okay. Which is pretty creative. And I would imagine that there will be more mitigation releases from reservoirs if the water can be protected to those who are, paid for the water. So it's pretty creative. So thank you for persisting to get this done.
Thank you, Director Wells.
Any other questions for Jerry or Peggy or Brad? All right. I just wanted to thank you too. I know Northern tried to do that legislation the year before, and I just want to commend you on the way that you handled it. And you invited everyone to be a part of it. You gave us all a voice in fashioning it to make sure that it worked for you as well, but as far as everybody else. So I just want to commend you on a job well done in the way to promote legislation. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And we'll pass that along to Mr. Wilkinson. As you all know, he was really doing the lion's share of the work on that. And that was his passion in his last year or so at the district, was to get that legislation passed. And we were glad that it all came together right as he was retiring. So thank you for all your help as well.
All right. No other questions? This requires no action. Is that correct? So we can move on. Thank you, Kaylee.
Thank you.
Agenda item 13, proposed expenditures for cost water acquisition for in-stream flow use. Linda is back up.
We do not have a PowerPoint for this one. Linda Bassey with the Stream and Lake Protection Section. Agenda item 13 is an action item. Proposed expenditures for costs of water acquisitions for in-stream flow use. Today, we've already referred to the $1 million fund for in-stream flow acquisitions and related costs, and to policy 19. And so that authorization is not just for the lease or purchase price of water acquisitions for in-stream flows. It also can be used for costs other than those prices, such as preliminary evaluations of water offered to CWCB for in-stream flow use, or monitoring needs, measuring needs. Page 2 of your memo includes an excerpt from Policy 19 that lists some of the types of costs that that the $1 million may pay for. And it has a catch-all at the end, including any costs not listed that the board deems appropriate. So the board has wide discretion on how to spend this money as long as it's related to acquisitions of water for in-stream flow use. In 2013, the board authorized staff to enter into a contract with an entity to perform tasks related to acquisition evaluations, monitoring activities, and other activities related to water acquisitions, to do work that your staff just isn't capable of doing. And we used a state sole source selection process, and it resulted in the Colorado Water Trust being eligible to enter into this contract with us. Under the board's authorization, we entered into a 5-year contract for an amount up to $500,000 to perform these water acquisition related tasks. That contract expires on August 21st of this year, and we have really benefited from that expenditure of funds. It has helped us do a lot more work than we would have been able to, and achieve a lot more than without it. So based on those benefits and our expectations that we're going to continue to receive offers of water for in-stream flow use, particularly given the request for water pilot acquisition process and the work that Water Trust continues to do. And we get contacted pretty regularly by people who are interested in exploring our program. So based on that, today we're seeking board authorization to initiate a selection process to enter into another 5-year, $500,000 contract for these types of tasks. And those would include historical consumptive use analyses, appraisals, title searches, site visits, engineering costs, which can range for engineering costs associated with long-term or permanent water acquisitions can range from $5,000 to over $100,000. It depends on the complexity of the water rights involved. It depends on the level of participation in water court that we may be engaged in that's necessary to implement the acquisition. Also, some of our temporary leases require on-site monitoring to comply with the conditions of DWR's approval. So the way it works is that staff managed the 5-year contract and with the one that we had with the Water Trust, and it was structured as a master task order contract. We got a scope of work that had general categories of the types of tasks that would be done. And then when there were specific projects to work on, the Water Trust submitted individual task orders, and we monitored, received progress reports, typical contract management. Starting at the bottom of page 2 of your memo and going on to page 3 is a summary of some of the work that was performed under that contract. And I think you'll probably recognize many of the projects that we were ultimately able to bring to the board for approval. So if the board authorizes us to move forward on this proposal, we'll coordinate with the State Controller's Office on the selection process and the contracting process. We feel that this type of contract is really beneficial. It helps move projects forward, and it enables CWCB and its partners to leverage and pool resources on water acquisitions, to work more effectively with water rights owners who are interested, and the end result to protect additional flows and streams. I can give you my recommendation, or first I can answer questions.
Are there any questions for Linda? Oh, Director Trick.
Can you speak to the selection process or elaborate on that in any way?
Yes. So we would, again, use what's called a sole source process, and we would identify the Colorado Water Trust because they really are the entity that we have worked with the most, who we think are most qualified to do this work. You submit a sole source justification to the DNR purchasing department. And if they approve that, we still have to put it out to bid. We make it public for 3 to 7 days to see if there is any other organization, individual entity who claims that they are capable of doing that work. And if someone does say yes, then the request goes out for a full bid. And if no one else steps up, then we would be allowed to contract with the Colorado Water Trust.
A follow-up question. How is the advertisement done for that, for other entities to become aware of it?
I believe it's posted on the Department of Personnel and Administration website, just like when they advertise state jobs. I am not an expert on this process, so I'm sorry if I can't answer that so specifically.
Mr. Sullivan.
Director Trick, Colorado has a state bids website. It's called BIDS, and notice goes out to anybody who's signed up or anybody who just wants to roam into the DPA website of any contracting offers that are put out there. So we use it for anything over $100,000 and even sometimes for less than $100,000, just to put it out there and let people know that there's contracting offered, and if you want to bid on it, there's a process for filling that out.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you,
Mike.
Director Anderson.
I'm not familiar with the Colorado Water Trust. Is that a for-profit organization, or is that?
No, it is a nonprofit organization that has the mission of restoring flows to Colorado streams in need and has done a lot of work. I think they have been in existence for almost 15 years. They've been a very valuable partner for our program. They've also done a lot of work with water rights owners on non-diversion agreements and enrollment in conservation programs like the River District's Water Conservation Program. They're not for profit.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Any other questions for Linda? All right, we have a staff recommendation. Do you want to read it?
Sure. Staff recommends that the board authorize it to initiate a selection process to contract with an entity for conducting technical analyses and performing other tasks necessary for evaluating proposed acquisitions of water for in-stream flow use and monitoring the use of acquired water. The contract would be for a term of 5 years for an amount not to exceed $500,000 and would be funded from the construction fund as authorized by section 3760 123.7 of the Colorado Revised Statutes.
All right, you've heard the recommendation. Director Wells. It's been moved by Director Wells, seconded by Director George, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 13. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, this is thank you, Linda. This is our lunch break, and we're pretty close to on schedule, so we'll just go ahead and reconvene at 12:45 as it says on our agenda. So lunch is outside, is that correct? Oh, yep. Okay. All right. So happy eating.